We are live with today's pre-show of our Network Plus N10-009 study group. Hello, everyone. Oh, look, there's the graphic. Yep, we're checking things out. It's the pre-show, which means we're just sort of getting things ready. This will be where we will be starting our study group. We've got a lot to go through today. Of course, in this first hour, I'm going to be asking you questions that come directly from the Network Plus exam objectives right here on our clock. We still have 10 minutes to go before the top of the hour. Hello, chat room. Hope everybody is doing well. What else have we got going on? Am I in the right stream? We need to make sure of that too. Oh, yep, says Network Plus. I'm in the right place. This is why we have a pre-show, by the way. That's exactly why we have a pre-show. All right. Let's check all of these. That looks good. Cameras are good. You can see all four of my camera inputs. I also have a stream input here, which is really just showing the same thing that's on this screen to my left, which isn't big enough, apparently. That's too small for me. I need to be able to see it. I don't know that that's really necessary. I think I could see everything I need to see in that tiny little box, but there are a few things that would be nice to see. I kind of like having the larger cache numbers here. That's how I tell if everything's still working. That's the real key. We got a lot to go through today. Of course, in the first hour, I'm going to be asking you all new questions from the Network Plus exam objectives. And then in the second hour, I'll answer your questions. So you can submit those questions at any time using the URL that is on your screen, professormesser.com/QA. QA, which is short for something. I'm not sure what's going on there with the QA. We've got also a live stream next week for Security Plus. It's unusual having a having a Friday live stream. We usually don't do Friday live streams, although it seems like I've done a lot recently. It seems my calendar, my schedule has been a bit chaotic as of late. And we've done quite a few, which is kind of nice. I kind of like having one just to kind of finish the week out, just as we're done. It's kind of nice to work that way. I've been all over this week. It's been a busy week. I've been to Miami and back. Here we are based in Central Florida, so that wasn't a huge trip. But went to Miami and back. We've got what else did we do? There was more, on the weekend I was out other places. Like, it's been constant motion. Finally I can sit down and do a live stream, which is really nice. It's just a lot of movement. I used to travel, as many of you know, I used to be in as a systems engineer. I used to travel all the time. So I would start my day on a Monday heading to the airport and then going to visit customers during the week, wherever they happen to be in the world, and then flying back on the weekend. And that's just sort of how cybersecurity and systems engineering worked. Let's check out cameras real quick. Here's one. Hey, how you doing? There's the camera. There's camera 2, camera 3, and camera 4, which has its screensaver on. So bloop, let's see that pop up. There we go. Everything's working there too. So you got a little insight. I've already done my podcast intros prior to going live, so you missed that fun part. You'll just have to listen in to the podcast if you really, really, really want to listen in on the intros. There is also today, we'll do this live stream, the first hour, second hour, and then I think we're in Central Florida during the summer, so I think at that point the rains hit. I think there is something in the Gulf right now, isn't there? Isn't there a thing out there right now? Oh, by the way, you can, of course, put your digital pin in our virtual pin cushion there. That would be a good place to go. Let's go to Spaghetti Models and see what's going on out there. That would be Mike's weather page. I'm going to bring it over here and see what's going on at the official National Hurricane Center. Let's see what they say. The 7-day tropical outlook. Yeah. So right where I am, Central Florida, is what's going on there. 20% chance of craziness, but we are in that particular part of the year where we have to be concerned about tropical weather. So that's what we're worrying about here, among other things. We're making it happen. So there's our tropical. Oh, and there's something else coming off of Africa too. Fantastic. That's what we like to see. That's sort of the normal. It's a normal summer heading into the fall for what we do here. We just have to keep an eye on it. All right, we got phones are over there. This is over here. Clock is going. What did the spaghetti model? Are there even spaghetti models for this yet? I'm sure there must be, right? Just some very basic ones. I'm flipping. You can see over my shoulder here as I'm flipping through Mike's weather page. There are some spaghetti models for this is past hurricane season. So no, nothing predicting. There's really nothing to predict at the moment. I guess the weather is a little crazy with this. Now that said, on that page, Google radar. I don't think I've done the Google radar before. Let's do that. Oh, that's kind of nice. Look at that. Let's have a look at the Google radar. This is what we do in the pre-show. You can tell that things are running okay. So the way that works. But so here in the Orlando area is where we are headquartered. And this is just offshore. So this is why I mention it, everybody. This is why I'm talking about rain, because it is top of mind. Now, does this also move for us? Let's go Google. I love this Google radar. It's super nice. How have I not used this before? Because it's not really Google radar. It's really something completely different up there that they've embedded over the Google Maps, I guess, which is kind of nice. Yeah, it looks like it's sort of spinning out to sea now. Who knows where it's going to go from there? I like that it's moving away from me. Here's the point. So much fun to deal with those things. Well, there we are. There's the story of the moment and what we're worrying about when we're not doing this. There's lots of other things going on. I've got it in the summer, by the way, it gets into a mode because really in sort of the later afternoon is when the rain starts. So the cycle in Central Florida during the summer is it's nice in the morning. You start getting a lot of clouds around lunch. And then by 3 or 4 o'clock, there's an enormous storm coming through. There's a violent, noisy electrical storm that comes through the area. And then by 7 or 8, it's usually gone and you can go about your evening. But that's sort of a prime time for me to write and create content. So I have this mode where I'm in the studio working most of the time during the day, and then the rain start coming in about 4, and there's a lot of lightning. So I have to shut this whole thing off because a direct lightning strike cannot be prevented. It can't be mitigated. If you are hit directly by lightning, a power surge is not going to help you. Our power surge prevention is not going to help you. The lightning goes right through it. And I speak from actual practice, I'm afraid. So I have a way, if there's anything around, I am notified. We always get the messages on our phones these days. Hey, there's lightning in your area. This whole thing gets shut down and physically unplugged from power and from network. So it becomes an island unto itself would be more appropriate, wouldn't it? So it becomes an island that has no connection out to the world. So lightning would have to come through the ceiling and actually hit the desk for there to be a problem, which thankfully does not happen. But we are very concerned about that. So everything shuts down, and then I move back into a different room with a laptop, and the laptop's already powered up. I got a good battery in it, so I can sit and work. But it's a little disruptive when that happens. But we're getting, that's the worst of our problems, I guess. Minute to go. Look how fast that went. Hope everybody's doing well. Thanks for joining us. We've got all of our questions and more coming up. Remember, you can put any question you have for me in the second hour. You can add it anytime from that link on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, or if you go to professormesser.com/live, I have embedded the Q&A, the Vevox Q&A onto that page. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see it. So you may not even have to pop open a new browser window. Just go to professormesser.com/live, which has the video, it has the chat, and it has the Vevox Q&A that you can use. Okay, let's make sure we got things ready to go here. Sure, it looks all right. Cameras are good. Recordings are going. I think we're in pretty good shape, right? We got stuff we can do here. It's pretty close to the top of the hour. Let's watch it change to 12, shall we? Just to make it official. We'll get this going. And let's see, 12 o'clock, straight up Look at that. That means we can shift over, go to our keynote, which communicates to this laptop to show me what is going on at what time, as long as we get a green light, and we did. Green light says good. That now sets up the remote control for the presentation. You see what's on my screen, which means it's time to get started, everybody. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the July 2026 Professor Messer N10-009. That is our Network Plus study group. This is the study group where I'm going to ask you questions that come directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. We get to see just how well you might know some of this Network Plus content. We have all brand new questions for you today, of course, as we always do in every study group. That means you can go back to watch the replays, and there's always going to be something new available for you. That's just the first hour of what we do here. We also have a second hour we call our after show. And the after show is something that we do to answer your questions. You might have questions for me, and I'll be glad to answer them in that after show. All you have to do is follow the link that I have on a screen that you can find right here. Here we go, at professormesser.com/QA. So you can pop open a new browser window. You can put that link in, professormesser.com/QA, and that will take you to a screen that is giving you information on what you need to do to be able to answer questions while you're here live. Now, this doesn't work if you're not watching the live stream, the actual live event. If you're watching this on demand or a replay, that link is not going to be active for you. But you can still follow along, keep up. There's plenty to do. In fact, we can test that right now because I have for you a question that is the only time you're going to get what we call our rewind question today. It's the only question that we have done previously. Now, as many of you know, we have a series of rules, a series of tasks that you can perform. First, you can go to that link to answer these questions. But please, we have a chat, of course, running right now. Please no answers in the chat. Please no hints in the chat. Just follow that link on your screen to answer the question. Let's look at this question. We'll see how you do with this, and we're going to come back to this. The question is, a mobile device connects to a new network and immediately attempts to configure its own routable IPv6 address without querying a DHCP server. Which of the following best describes this process? Let's see how well you might remember this one from last month. Is it dynamic routing, proxy DHCP, SLAAC, or UE64 transformation? So certainly all of these things are important to know for your exam, but which one is the one that we need to know for this exam? Let's see if you happen to remember this one. This is the only time you're going to get a rewind question today. So let's see how well you do. And of course, you can answer this question at any time using not that connection, using that link. There it is, professormesser.com/QA. We're going to come back to this question in just a moment and see how you did. Don't forget that we do one of these study groups every month. Normally, we have, of course, our entire Network Plus training course available for you to watch for free on YouTube. You can go there at any time and watch any of the videos of any of our training classes absolutely free. Every minute of every video is put out there on YouTube for you to watch the entire course. Nothing is behind a paywall. You don't have to provide any additional payments, or there's no subscriptions to be able to access these. And of course, when we're not here on our live streams, you'll find that we not only have our YouTube channel at professormesser.com/YouTube, we also have weekly Network Plus pop quiz questions at professormesser.com/X and /Instagram and /LinkedIn and /Facebook. You get the idea. There's all kinds of places you can go to find information that's going to help you pass your Network Plus exam. The Network Plus exam itself is what we call the N10-009. We've already mentioned that a few times today. That is referring to the version number of the current Network Plus exam. That version number is important. You need to make sure that all of your study materials match that number. And if they don't match that number, you have the wrong study materials. This exam was released on June the 20th of 2024, which means that we think this exam will retire somewhere around the fourth quarter of 2027. That's the fourth calendar quarter. So as we sit here sort of in the middle of 2026, you effectively have almost a year and a half to be able to pass this exam. And a year and a half is plenty of time to be able to do that. You might want to go through and see how well you might know some of this content and study up for it. Usually it takes people a few months, which means if you're studying materials still say N10-009, you've got exactly the right study materials. The exam itself is 90 minutes in length, and you can get a score of 720. That's the passing score. It's graded on a scale between 100 and 900. So 720, you got to do pretty well on this exam to score that and earn your Network Plus certification. Fortunately, it's just one single exam. That helps a little bit as well. The exam itself is mostly multiple choice questions, but at the very beginning of the exam, you will get a handful of what CompTIA calls performance-based questions. Usually it's around 5 or so questions, sometimes fewer, sometimes more. Everybody's exam is a little bit different. And we will talk about performance-based questions here in just a moment because we always have a brand new performance-based question at the beginning of every study group. Of course, we have so many other study materials that can help you. If you like the videos, then you're going to love the course notes. You're going to like the Exam Hacks ebook. We've got enhanced access, special access to this Q&A and others. So this is something you might want to check out at professormesser.com/netsuccess. Give you some things that might help you when you're studying for your exam. Also let you know that this will be available for replay immediately after we're done here. I hit the stop button, a few minutes goes by, and that video is immediately available on our YouTube channel. I also create an audio-only podcast distributed version of this live stream. I edit that immediately afterwards and post it, and you'll probably see it appear about a day or so, sometimes the same day, sometimes the next day. You can either get this from your favorite podcast listening program or go to your favorite streaming service. For example, if you're on Spotify, simply search for Professor Messer and you'll find our podcast is listed there as well. About a day after we're done, you'll notice that the YouTube video description has a lot of information that has suddenly been added almost magically. We have a detailed timestamp of everything that we do in this live stream, thanks to my marketing manager, Lori, who is watching this probably at 2x speed, try to get through the entire thing. She puts down all of these timestamps, and that's why you end up getting such accurate information from us. This is done by humans, which are really the best ones to be able to do things like this. Otherwise, there's a lot of inaccuracies that tend to get in there when you use other processes. So it's nice to have the ability to give you an accurate representation of what we did today. So if you're looking for anything that's going on, you can find it very quickly in the index, click that timestamp and go directly to that particular part of the video. Also let you know that when we're not doing these live videos, we have our chat available. That is our Discord. You can go to professormesser.com/Discord. And of course, we have thousands of people that have joined our Discord that are studying for their A+, their Network Plus, their Security Plus exam, and other certifications. And there are a lot of people in the Discord that have already gone through these certifications that are handing out a lot of great tips, tricks, and ideas for people to be studying. You can create your own private study rooms on this Discord that people can simply join. It's a very quick way to meet people and suddenly start studying together. All available on our website. Go to professormesser.com/Discord. Eventually, you will need to take the Network Plus exam. And of course, you have to pay to take that exam. You could go to the CompTIA website and pay full price. But why would you do that? If you are in the US or Canada or US territory, I have exactly the same vouchers available to you, but at a discount. So you can save a little bit of money by simply going to professormesser.com/vouchers and getting your vouchers from there. Not only do you get the voucher at a discount, you're already winning. You're already saving money. I also give you something a little extra. That is my Exam Hacks ebook. I've compiled a list of all of the tips, tricks, strategies, and things you can do, not only for studying for the exam, but strategies that can help you during the exam itself to perhaps get you a few extra points. You can find that in our Exam Hacks ebook. All of these are available to you by simply visiting professormesser.com/vouchers and purchasing your vouchers from our website. Also helps support what we do here, and thank you so much for that ongoing support. Let's talk about that question I asked earlier, which is, a mobile device connects to a new network and immediately attempts to configure its own routable IPv6 address without querying a DHCP server. Which of the following best describes this process? Is it dynamic routing, proxy DHCP, Slack, or UEI-64 transformation? Let's see what you chose in this one. We will close our poll And we can see that 63% of you, a nice, respectable, large number, said Slack. We also have a third of you, practically 31%, just under a third, said dynamic routing. We also have 4% down to single digits that said proxy DHCP, and only 2% said UEI-64 transformation. Well, this is something that we do use on IPv6 networks, and it is Slack. Slack is the stateless address auto configuration, and this is what we created with IPv6 to get past this requirement for having a DHCP server, to get past a requirement for having to manually configure things with IPv4. Prior to IP being such a popular protocol on networks, we were using other layer 3 protocols like IPX, where you just turn on a machine and it automatically is able to create addresses and communicate outside of its subnet without needing any other servers. With IPv4, we were really required to have a DHCP server to provide that automated function. It's just a normal part of what we do now. But with IPv6, we thought you could have DHCP, or what if we had a way for the local station to automatically figure out what subnet it was on, automatically assign an IP address that nobody is currently using, and then automatically find the routers on your network to be able to automatically route off of this subnet, all without having a DHCP server. Now, granted, there are some nice things to have in a DHCP server that can help you with this, but it's one of those scenarios where having Slack available makes the process so much easier. It's something where you simply turn on a computer and IPv6 works. It's remarkable how long it really has taken us to roll out IPv6. But it's one of those scenarios where you will probably find that at some point you will be doing more and more and more and more IPv6, although it seems to be a very slow rollout in many cases. IPv4 is still working for us and working for us quite well. So in this case, those of you that answered that 63% of Slack got it absolutely correct. It would not be the 31% that said dynamic routing. Dynamic routing is certainly important for being able to automatically know how the routes would best get from one IP subnet to another. And if something changes on the network, maybe a router fails, maybe you have a link go down, the dynamic routing can automatically send updates to dynamically change the path to get to that site that may be out on the internet somewhere. And that's useful, but it doesn't describe the problem of creating a routable IPv6 address on a device without using DHCP. That dynamic routing is something you would configure on a router. Proxy DHCP is something very unusual to find. DHCP itself is sort of a proxy in the way that it operates, but DHCP and proxy DHCP is not something you commonly see. Normally, it's a straight DHCP request to a DHCP server and getting a response back. Excuse me. And in this case, you can see that a DHCP server was specifically listed in the question as not being available. We're not querying a DHCP server, whether directly or as a proxy, so that we would not be using any type of proxy or DHCP to make that happen. 2% of you said UEI-64 transformation. And although that is a useful task when you're working through the process of defining an IPv6 address based on an IPv4 address, that would be very useful, but that's not what the question was asking. It was about creating and assigning IP addresses. So that's not what we would be using for that one either. In this case, Slack would be the best description of this process. 63% said that it would be the stateless address auto configuration, and 63% of you got that one absolutely right. I think we even did a little better than how we did last month. Well, how about some brand new questions? Let's go to the brand new questions now. And we always start our study groups with a new question that is a performance-based question. As many of you are aware, the CompTIA exam presents two different kinds of questions to you. The huge bulk of the exam is mostly multiple choice. That's the kind that we just did, where there was a question and then multiple answers that you could choose from. But the first handful of questions you get on your exam will not be multiple choice. They'll be anything but multiple choice. And that really is the definition of a performance-based question. Is just anything that's not multiple choice. Fill in the blank. They can put you to command prompt and have you perform a function. You could be putting things in a particular order. Maybe it's a drag and drop question. Maybe it's a question where you're using pull-down menus. There's a lot of different ways to ask a question. As we like to say, if you have studied your exam objectives, all of the questions that you get, whether they are multiple choice or performance-based, will all come from those exam objectives. So if you know your content, it really doesn't matter how they ask the question. You will know the answer. So I have for you, as we do with all of our study groups, our first new question of the month is a performance-based question. And this performance-based question is one that asks, a help desk technician is troubleshooting several network connectivity issues reported by users in different departments. For each troubleshooting task, select the best command line tool to use. And even in this case, unlike the previous week where we had a study group where I didn't give you the possible answers, this time I am. But remember, we only have 4 of these, but your possible answers are ping, traceroute, NSLOOKUP, TCP dump, dig, netstat, IP/ipconfig/ifconfig, and ARP. So effectively, your possible answers are any one of the command line options that you could use that come directly from the exam objectives. So how many of them is that? There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different possibilities here, but there, of course, is only 4 specific questions. The 4 different scenarios that we are trying to decide here are these 4. A user says they cannot reach a server by IP address. The technician wants to verify basic layer 3 reachability and round-trip response time. Which of those 8 commands would you use to solve that particular scenario? The next one is, a workstation can reach websites by IP address, but not by domain name. The next one is, a user can reach the local gateway, but cannot reach a remote server. Where along the path are packets not being forwarded? And then lastly, a server appears to have unexpected listening ports. The technician wants to view active connections and listening ports on the local system. What command would you use for that? So those are your 4 information, the reports, the ticket information that you're going through. And I want you to tell me, of those 8 commands, which 4 would you put into this scenario? If you think you know the answer, please no answers in the chat room. Instead, you want to go to the link on your screen, go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. So we've got a good chance here of getting all 4 of these right, but with 8 possible answers, you could get none of them right, or you might get 3 of them right, or 2 of them right. So on the exam, this is not an unusual scenario. In fact, this is very common on the exam, where they will ask you to fill in these blanks with given answers, but they always seem to give you more answers than you have questions, which means it makes it a little more difficult. They increase that difficulty level of the question itself. That also means that you could potentially get maybe half the questions right and half the questions wrong. Does that mean that you get partial credit? CompTIA has said on their website, they have a frequently asked questions for performance-based questions where they do say that it is possible that they could, in some situations, give you partial credit, which means we don't know if they're going to give you partial credit or not, but they could. Ultimately, you have no idea how they grade the exam anyway. They don't disclose that information. And when you get your final score, you will have no idea how they graded any of the questions that you received. All you will know is what your final score is. And they also list out the major sections of the exam objectives where you happen to miss questions, where you got questions wrong. That doesn't really tell you anything about the scoring. So you'll never know how it's scored. But you will have information here that you could, of course, pull from on the screen, maybe to do the best you can with this particular performance-based question. If you think you know what these 4 are, I'm still waiting for a few more answers to come in. You can put them in anytime using that link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA to submit the answer of what you think the right command line utility would be. This would be pretty good if you were someone who was working through command lines and knowing when to use them. This is the type of question CompTIA likes you to be able to answer, because this is more than just how do you type things into a command prompt. It's more along understanding in what scenario would this command work the best. And that's really what they're trying to get out of you, is, do you really have an understanding of how that particular command is used and when you would use it? Along those lines, let's step through each one of these and see how well you did with these questions. Again, the question asks, a help desk technician is troubleshooting several network connectivity issues reported by users in different departments. For each troubleshooting task, select the best command line tool to use. Possible options will be ping, traceroute, nslookup, TCP dump, dig, netstat, IP/ipconfig/ifconfig, and ARP. So we'll start with our very first ticket information and report scenario. That is, a user says they cannot reach a server by IP address. The technician wants to verify basic layer 3 reachability and round trip response time. Well, if we're talking about layer 3 reachability, we're talking about connecting to a device using an IP address. But of course, the question here said that the user cannot reach a server by IP address. So let's test that. And one of the best ways to test that would be using the ping command. That's exactly what ping was built for, is to be able to send layer 3 data to a device and have that device respond back with information. Usually this is something we are pinging a device based on its fully qualified domain name, which of course then has to perform a DNS resolution to be able to determine the IP. And then at that point, ping will ping directly with that IP address. So this is a great utility, and hopefully you'll be able to get a response from that machine to see if it's really talking on the internet, talking on the network, or not. It's a great way to verify if a system may be reachable from where we happen to be. That's exactly the problem that this particular technician is trying to solve. Let's do another one. Next on our list is a workstation can reach websites by IP address, but not by domain name. I gave away a little bit of this earlier. The process, if you type in to ping www.professormesser.com, it's not going to ping based on that name. Before ping can work, it needs to resolve the IP address of that fully qualified domain name. And that IP resolution occurs in many cases, in most cases, the help of a DNS server. That's the domain name system, which means that if we want to directly query a DNS server to see is it providing the right IP address resolution, we'll want to use some type of query tool that can ask the DNS server directly, hey, what IP address do you have for www.professormesser.com? So we would use a utility like nslookup, that's name server lookup, literally in the name of the utility. And there's an alternate utility you can use, especially if you are on Linux or Mac OS. You might want to use dig. They effectively are providing the same functionality, although the nslookup command is a bit deprecated at this point. That means they will not be performing any more updates to the nslookup utility. Instead, dig would be the utility going forward. Although if you're on Windows, Windows does not come with a native version of dig. So this is also a bit operating system specific. So make sure you're using the right utility depending on what operating system you're doing. If this said a Linux workstation, then you might want to think, well, maybe we'll use a Linux utility to troubleshoot from this workstation. If this said a Windows workstation, we use a Windows utility. So if it's Linux, maybe we go dig. If it's Windows, we go nslookup. There are some Windows versions of dig available you can find out there. They're not very common, but you can find utilities like this. There's certainly a WinDig out there somewhere. I've seen that one as well. And other options. There is also a dig executable, native Windows executable out there as well, but it's becoming a little bit more difficult to find because it is no longer supported. Just another thing to keep in mind for that. Our next scenario, our next ticket, the report we received was that a user can reach the local gateway, but cannot reach a remote server. Where along the path are packets not being forwarded? Well, of course, here we're not asking you to tell me where along the path that's not being forwarded. We want to know what command line utility are you going to use to troubleshoot or find that information. And if you're looking for the path between point A and point B, one of the best utilities you can use would be traceroute, all spelled out if you're in Linux or Mac OS, or traceRT, same utility, same functionality, same capability, that is available in the Windows operating system. So traceroute or traceRT is a great one to use because it will show you every hop along the way between point A and point B. And if we can't make our way to point B, it will show us what the last hop or the last router is that we were able to communicate with before we lost connection to the rest of that networks and that particular route. So a nice set of utilities to use. You'll be using ping probably as your number one tool. That's the thing we use constantly in our industry. Traceroute, probably a close number two, because we use traceroute quite a bit, especially if you're installing new routers, you're installing a new firewall. This is one of those where it's very useful to be able to connect a device and then test its connectivity and exactly the path it is taking using the traceroute command. Our last report in the help desk that we received was that a server appears to have unexpected listening ports. Already we have to know what that means. That's a little bit weird sounding, just to put it on a piece of paper. The technician wants to view active connections and listening ports on the local system. Of course, listening ports means that we have an application that has opened up a port that is servicing a particular port number on that device. It's usually a utility that you would start. For example, if you started a web server, the web server is probably opening up port 80 and port 443. So it would be really useful on a system, especially if it's a system that we've never touched before, how many open ports are on this system, which can automatically tell us what is connecting to this device from the network, or what could potentially connect to this device from the network. It might also be able to tell us information about what type of applications are loaded on this system. And we can get an understanding from a security perspective if those ports really should be open, or if maybe we should close those ports. This is something extremely useful to have, and we would use Netstat to be able to provide those. Netstat, incredibly useful to be able to have this. So hopefully if you're somebody who is kind of working through troubleshooting a network, I used to install multiple firewalls every day. We would be installing and setting up and configuring layer 3 information, defining name servers, and setting up links out to the internet. Ping was essential. Traceroute was incredibly important to have. And Netstat gave us especially information when we were wanting to configure a device that could pull from Active Directory, pull everybody's names and groups in, and then provide that Active Directory information to the firewall. That allowed us to create firewall rules based on somebody's Active Directory group or their Active Directory user. So Netstat was great for that. We could look to see what particular ports were being serviced or what were open on that particular machine. Those were the answers that we needed in this particular question. We have a user says they cannot reach a server by IP address. To verify basic layer 3 reachability and round-trip response time, we would use ping. We also have a workstation can reach websites by IP address, but not by domain name. Well, let's perform an NS lookup or a dig to query the name server ourselves. A user can reach the local gateway, but cannot reach a remote server. Where along the path are packets not being forwarded? That is a perfect use for traceroute or traceRT. And then a server appears to have unexpected listening ports. If you want to know what ports really are open on a computer and which ports are closed, you can query directly on that device using the netstat command. Well, this means there were 4 that we did not use. We did not use TCP dump. TCP dump is obviously a utility that dumps TCP packets. It actually dumps a lot more than just TCP. The name is a bit misleading. It's a packet capture utility you can run at the command line. You can set filters. You can configure source and destination IP addresses. You can set up port numbers. Very useful to be able to capture based on a number of different criteria. You can save all that information to a file and then transfer that file over and open it up in a different utility such as Wireshark to be able to view the packet capture. Incredibly useful utility. Didn't fit any of our particular scenarios here, but still an important utility you need to know because it is in your CompTIA exam objectives. We did not choose the ifconfig, ipconfig, or what we use today in Linux, the IP command, to be able to configure or view IP-specific configuration details on a computer. But that is something extremely useful to run. And it's important to know which one to use in which operating system, because you can want to use ipconfig in Windows and ifconfig in Linux. And ultimately, your Linux distribution may also, and perhaps use as an alternative, the newer and probably more modern IP command, which actually adds a lot more functionality. And the other utility we did not use today was ARP. That's Address Resolution Protocol. And ARP, extremely useful to be able to see the comparison of MAC address to IP, especially on a local machine. And that's something that can help you quite a bit. ARP is a great utility to have available. It is available at your command prompt, and it can help you understand when you are communicating with the local IP address, what is the MAC address of that particular device. That, of course, is the basic function of the Address Resolution Protocol. Well, there are your 4 answers for the performance-based question this month. And of course, you not only know the answers, you also know the ones you did not choose and why you didn't choose them. Make sure that if you are studying for your Network Plus exam, that you know all of the command line options that are available. You'll find them in section 5.5 of the official exam objectives. And I go through and give you a demonstration of every single one of these in my video called Command Line Tools. So if there's any of these you don't recognize, you think you want to know more about it, that is the video you can go to get a lot more details. You'd think most people did really well on the answers coming in for our performance-based question. Let's now shift back to a multiple choice-based question and see if we can keep all of that going. Our next question is this one that asks, when performing a power budget calculation for a long-distance fiber run, which of the following must be subtracted from the transmitter's power output? Would we subtract the switch's total PoE capacity? Would we instead subtract the wavelength of the light? Would we subtract the current SFP wattage draw? Would we subtract losses from connections and splices? Or would we subtract the number of VLANs assigned to the link? This is certainly something you need to know about. Make sure you are familiar with those. There's quite a bit that you have to know for the exam. If you're wondering about power budget calculations and fiber and all of the options that are on this screen, they all come directly from the exam objectives. If you think you know what the answer is, go to the link you see on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, and lock in your answer. See how well you might know this one. This is also something good just to know if you're ever working with fiber. And you probably will be doing quite a bit with fiber optic communication as you get more and more into networking. We use fiber extensively in our data centers and elsewhere. I use quite a bit of fiber here at home for different things. Probably a little bit of overkill. The bulk of what I have in my studio and my home is copper, just because copper is so flexible these days. You can do so much at such high speeds. So this might be really good to consider if you're working through this. Number of you locking in your answers now. See what you think the answer might be. Let's go through and see how well you might know this one. The question asks, when performing a power budget calculation for a long-distance fiber run, which of the following must be subtracted from the transmitter's power outlet? Would it be the switch's total PoE capability? Would it be the wavelength of the light? Would it be the current SFP wattage draw? Would it be losses from connections and splices, or would it be the number of VLANs assigned to the link? Let's see how you did with this one. We will close our poll, and it's a rainbow. We got a lot of different answers here, so we might be able to learn something on this one. If we look at really sort of a three-way tie for first place, you could say these current SFP wattage draw, the switch's total PoE capacity, and losses from connections and splices, all three of those are pretty close, although with 33% of the vote, the current SFP wattage draw is the one that got the highest number of votes. We also have double digits. 10% of you said the wavelength of the light is what we should subtract from the transmitter's power outlet, and only 2% of you said the number of VLANs assigned to the link. So not very many people choosing that one. Well, transceiver signal strength is an important consideration. Whenever we're working with transceivers and really fiber optic equipment in general, we have to be able to put enough light down that fiber that it can be received on the other side, interpreted, and that we're able to communicate easily back and forth between those devices. Well, that means that at some point, there's enough light coming through. That also means at some point you could be losing light as it passes through that link, that attenuation occurs, and you don't have enough light coming through. Well, how do you know if you have enough or not enough? Well, there are specifications for each transceiver and fiber connection that you're using. Check the documentation that you have for what you're connecting to, and it will tell you we need to see this much signal coming in to be able to interpret the information coming in and be able to reconstruct that data coming in the video side. Pretty important, and each transceiver is different on how much that it can handle from that perspective. So you want to calculate a power budget, calculate what the transmitter power is, look at how much you're losing as it goes through that fiber connection, and then you'll be able to really get an understanding or at least a summary of what you think the power would be coming in that other side. And then you give yourself a little bit of overhead to make sure that it doesn't get too low. This is something where you'll not only need to calculate how much power is coming out of the transmitter, we also have to calculate signal loss. So every time there is a splice, every time there's a cut, every time you're putting a type of coupler in the middle, you're putting different connectors on the end, that is going to affect how much of the light is able to make it through that particular link. Every time you make a cut, every time you make a splice, every time you put on a connector, you're losing a little bit of light each time. So you'll subtract all of that signal loss from the transmitter, and then you'll compare that to what the local transceiver can receive. You can look through the specifications. There is in the transceiver information, I took the specifications of a transceiver that I have here, and it provides a receiver sensitivity, and it tells me how much signal has to come in for that transceiver to be able to interpret what we are seeing in this view. So that receiver sensitivity and the information that we're looking for can be affected by a number of different things, but the only thing on this list that affects it is the one that 28% of you chose, which would be losses from connections and splices. Every time you make a connection, every time you make a splice, you lose a little bit of light, and that little bit of light can add up over time. We want to make sure that if it is a very long run, that we're not losing so much light that we're not able to actually communicate. 33% of you said the current SFP wattage draw. These SFPs that we use, these are used to be able to have a flexible and modular type of connection. So if you need copper, you can use a copper SFP. If you need multi-mode fiber, there are multi-mode fiber SFPs. If you're running some type of single mode fiber, then you will need a single mode SFP. That SFP then is using power from the switch or from the device it's connected to be able to power itself. Although that is an interesting statistic, how much power is the transceiver using? Most of the time, the devices that we are using, like routers, switches, firewalls, even in-user devices that has these SFP connectors, they have plenty of power to support them. So usually we don't even have to worry about the wattage, and the wattage draw of an SFP does not affect how much light is coming in through the connection. That affects, can we power the transceiver and use it? So it would not be the current SFP wattage draw, even though the plurality of you chose that one at 33%. The switch's total power over Ethernet capacity is an important statistic, because if you're ever working with a PoE switch and you need to power PoE devices, there's only so much power that particular switch can put out over those power over Ethernet links. Power over Ethernet, incredibly useful to have, but PoE is not the same thing as working with fiber connections. Obviously, fiber is not sending power over Ethernet. Power over Ethernet is sent over copper connections, which in this particular case means that can't be a possible answer because it's PoE and we're working with fiber. So although the capacity of PoE is an important statistic and something you should keep an eye on and is part of your Network Plus exam objectives, it is not the correct answer for this particular question. We also have 10% of you that said the wavelength of the light. It's always interesting to see wavelength. Light wavelength is different depending on if you're using multi-mode and single mode and different types of connections for different types of Ethernet standards or the type of connection standards you have going through. But the wavelength of the light does not affect the power budget calculation for a long distance fiber run. Generally speaking, we know what the output is. We know how much light we're going to receive on the other side, and then we can start taking away based on how many different splices, connections, couplings that we are doing along the way. And then finally, only 2% of you chose this one. The number of VLANs assigned to the link, well, we know we can have thousands of VLANs assigned to a link. Usually it's only a handful, but it can certainly be a larger number than that. And the number of VLANs, which specifies the number of separate layer 2 broadcast domains, that number of VLANs has nothing to do with the power budget for a long distance fiber run. And that's why really only 2% of you chose that one. In this case, the answer that we were looking for was the answer that 28% of you chose. Anytime you have a connection, anytime you're making a splice, anytime you're putting in a coupler, anytime you're putting in a new connector, you're losing light, and you have to keep that in mind as you are calculating your light budget between point A and point B. 28% of you got that one right. Well done with that one, and maybe we learned something about working with fiber and working with power budgets and doing those calculations. I do a whole calculation in the video. So if you go back to that video that we have, which in this case is in section 5.2, it's called Hardware Issues. We do go through more specifics on how you could calculate that power budget yourself. Well, as you can already see, we have talked about a lot of different topics already, dealing with fiber and copper and power over Ethernet and budgets and being able to understand the nuances of dynamic routing versus static routing and Slack and IPv6 and IPv4. It goes on and on. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of topics you need to know to pass your Network Plus exam. Now, of course, I've created this entire course and made it available for free so that you can go to the internet and be able to watch everything and learn everything you need to know about the Network Plus exam. We cover every single topic from the exam objectives. You would be hard pressed to find a more comprehensive Network Plus course than what we offer to you for free on our YouTube channel. It is 87 videos, though, and over 12 hours of content, and that may just be too much for some folks. Maybe you don't have enough time to go through every video. Maybe you've gone through those videos, but you sort of forget what the details of each video happen to be. And that's why I created this document. This is my Network Plus course notes. And the course notes are designed to give you not only an idea of the information you might be working with. So for example, here's all of the table of contents on these course notes and a breakdown, a video by video breakdown with every bit of text, all of the important tables, all of the important graphics, all of the important summaries. Everything is in this document. How many pages are in this document? We've got quite a few. We got 70 pages of notes that are in here. Now, you could, of course, take notes yourself, and maybe you're more comfortable doing that, and that's just fine. But this is a way that you might want to summarize everything in one place with our set of course notes. It's also a great way to support the things that we do here on the website. If you're interested in these notes, I do have a video demonstration to show you even more. It's available on our website at professormesser.com/NPCN, and you can learn more about how these course notes might help you with your studies. That's something I hope maybe if you've gone through the videos, you've read a book, you've done some labs, maybe some Q&A, and it's time to prepare for the exam. This might be a very useful preparation tool. You can find out more on our website, professormesser.com/NPCN. Let's do some more questions, though. We got more multiple choice coming at you. So here's our next multiple choice question about working with some higher speed networks. The question asks, an administrator is designing a 40 gigabit per second backbone link between two core switches. Which of the following transceiver standards should be selected to achieve this 40 gigabit aggregate throughput? Would you use 16G fiber channel, QSFP plus, SFP, SFP plus, or QSFP? All of these are actual standards. We did not make these up. These are things you definitely need to know for your exam. If you think you know the answer, please no answers in the chat room. Instead, go to the link that you see here, professormesser.com/QA, and lock in your answer. Might be good to break down some of these things. Everything that you're seeing, or I try to put into every single question and every single answer, actual topics from the exam objectives. So if you're seeing a topic or an answer that maybe you don't immediately recognize, go back to the exam objectives. So you'll be able to find exactly what's listed there. So things like fiber budgets, they're in the exam objectives. Things like aggregate throughput, on a backbone link. It's in the exam objectives. And so I try to also give you answers that are from there. So even if you know the answer in this list, you might see one of the available answers that maybe you don't recognize. Maybe it's a topic that you've forgotten. Make a note of that and go back to your exam objectives to study up on that particular topic as well. So you're really getting more than just one answer in these questions. You're getting multiple answers that you can, of course, use as an actionable item, be able to study based on that content. Let's see how you did with this one. The question asks, an administrator is designing a 40 gigabit per second backbone link between two core switches. Which of the following transceiver standards should be selected to achieve this 40 gigabit per second aggregate throughput? It's got to be one of these, right? Is it 16G fiber channel, QSFP plus, SFP, SFP plus, or just QSFP? Let's close our poll and see how you did. Big numbers this time. 68% of you say the answer is QSFP plus. 16% said QSFP would be able to handle that. We also have 12% that said SFP plus. We've got 4% that said 16G fiber channel, and then 0% said SFP. I've used this SFP and SFP plus term now for the last two questions. I think it's now time to talk a little bit more about transceivers. SFP stands for the small form factor pluggable. Sometimes you'll see that connected to a gigabit per second connection because SFP supports up to 1 gigabit connectivity. These were some of the original SFPs we started working with. You can see you've got this empty spot. It's just an empty blank section in a switch, or in this case, I believe it's a switch. And we have an SFP that we plugged in, and we plugged our fiber directly into that SFP. This is great because now if you have a copper connection, I can plug in a copper SFP, and right next to it, if I have a fiber connection, I can plug in a fiber SFP and be able to use both of those. And that means that we don't have to buy a switch specifically made for copper or specifically made for fiber. We can simply plug in the correct SFP for the type of connection that we're using. There's also a standard known as SFP plus. This is the same physical connection. It looks just like an SFP, but it supports higher speeds, up to 16 gigabits per second. So if you're running 10 gig, you might be using SFP plus type of transceivers inside of your switch. But that's not fast enough for what we wanted. We have a 40 gigabit per second aggregate throughput to be able to do this. So we need to use a faster standard to be able to transfer that data. And that faster standard is one known as the quad small form factor pluggable. That's what the Q in QSFP stands for. So if it's a quad and we have a QSFP, 4 SFPs would be the same as 4 1 gigabit per second links. It can support up to a 4 gigabit throughput. QSFP plus is 4-channel SFP plus, which means we can have up to 4 10 gigabit per second connections, and we have 40 gigabits per second. So there's our option of being able to plug these in. If we need 40 gigabits per second, the standard that we are looking for is a QSFP plus to be able to do that. Now, if you wanted to see these side by side, they do look differently. This is an SFP or SFP plus. I don't even remember which one I had, but they are exactly the same form factor, the same size. The QSFP, even though it supports effectively 4 times the throughput, it is not 4 times the size, which is kind of nice. So we can have just a little bit larger transceiver and support a lot more throughput through that device. Nice to have those available. So as we mentioned in our previous view, being able to support 40 gigabits per second, we would need QSFP plus to be able to support that. And thankfully, 68% of you chose QSFP plus. That was the answer that we were looking for, and you got that one absolutely correct. We also have the other answers you had here. QSFP, of course, as we've just seen, only supports 10 megabits per second. SFP plus, or QSFP, is 4 times that other one. So the quad SFP will be 4 gigabits per second. SFP plus supports 10 gigabit, SFP 1 gigabit. The one we needed was the QSFP plus. 16 gig fiber channel doesn't quite get us to 40 gigabit per second of an Ethernet connection. That's a completely separate type of connectivity. This might be something to consider if you're ever connecting up different types of switches and you need additional throughput. Make sure you check the specifications of your switch or your router or your firewall or whatever you're using. make sure that it can support the transceiver that you need to be able to support the speeds that you're ultimately going to require. Those transceivers can be incredibly useful. Make sure that you design your network with all of those in mind. If you're watching this video for continuing education unit credit, I would love to send you an email that provides you with a 1-hour webinar category CEU. The way that you would earn that CEU is to follow these instructions. Go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website, click on Contact Us, and in that Contact Us link, make sure that you go through and put in your name, your email address. In the subject line, please put July 2026 Network Plus. And in the body of the message on a line by itself, put the super secret code words of the month, QSFP plus QSFP. So really 2 super secret code words of the month, both of them very similar to each other. Make sure that you know the differences in those two and put both of those down into the body of the message. You could then, of course, put anything else in that message you would like. That's all being sent to me. And in about a week or so, I tend to turn these around and get back to you the details of this. So make sure that you are familiar with all of that. One of the best things you can do if you're trying to earn CEUs is to get a lot of different kinds. So you can't simply watch a video replay and renew everything, but we could get you closer to that goal. Again, the process that you would use would be to go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website, click Contact Us. In the Contact Us link, put your name, your email address. In the subject line, please put July 2026 Network Plus. And in the body of the message, put the super secret code words of the month, which are QSFP plus QSFP. Did I do it the same way the second time? Do it one of those 2 times. If they're the same, use that one. If they're different, use one of them. I'll take either of those. I should probably write this down somewhere, right? I usually take about a week to get these back to you. You'll notice the last batch that went out took a little bit more than a week. So I'm gonna quickly try to work through all of that. So hopefully you'll be a little more familiar with that process because you'll get an answer back pretty quick from me. Maybe I can get that done this weekend for you and get all of those together. Another great way to maybe help you with the renewal process. If you haven't earned your certification yet, none of that will matter to you, but that's okay. QSFP Plus is what we were looking for. 68% of you got that one absolutely right. Well done. We've got time for more questions. Let's squeeze another one in here. The next question on our list is the one that I have here, which asks, an IT department is setting up a new connection to the public internet and needs to exchange routing information with their ISP to connect separate autonomous systems. Which of the following would be the best choice for this task? Would it be what I have here, OSPF, ICMP, EIGRP, BGP, or RIP-v2? It's got to be one of these, right? The question asks, an IT department is setting up a new connection to the public internet and needs to exchange routing information with their ISP to connect separate autonomous systems. Which of the following would be the best choice for this task? Would it be OSPF, ICMP, EIGRP, BGP, or RIP-v2? If you think you know the answer, go to the link on your screen, professormesser.com/QA. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. You want to go directly to that link, lock in your answer. Obviously, if you're watching this on the replay, just remember what you think the answer would be, and we'll go through the details of that. See how you do with setting this one up. This not only is this question one that has a lot to it, we have to kind of think through everything that is in this question, but the answers are all abbreviations. They're all acronyms. So this really becomes a little bit more of a challenge to be able to remember what those acronyms mean or what they represent. This is something that's common in the industry, is at some point in your work life, you end up using the acronyms so much that you sometimes forget what the actual words are associated with those letters. And that's just common. But everybody knows what you're saying when you say OSPF. Everybody knows what you're saying when you say ICMP, EIGRP, BGP, RIP-v2. We know what you mean. And sometimes we don't even have to remember ourselves what those words are. We just know that that's what it refers to. So see if you happen to know when you're getting through that one too. This might be a good one. I think a lot of us might remember this one from our exam objectives. There are a number of different dynamic routing protocols we need to know for the Network Plus. Some of these are dynamic routing protocols in this list, of course, being able to work through it. Let's see how we did with this. Our question again asks, an IT department is setting up a new connection to the public internet and needs to exchange routing information with their ISP to connect separate autonomous systems. Which of the following would be the best choice for this task? Would it be OSPF, ICMP, EIGRP, BGP, or RIP v2? Let's see how you did with this one. We'll close our poll. And 59% of you say the answer is BGP. Just over half of you. We also have 15% that said EIGRP. And then everything goes to single digits, albeit high single digits, 8% with ICMP, 9% with OSPF, and 9% with RIP v2. Effectively a three-way tie for third place. You want to look at it that way. 59% said BGP. That's a pretty good number, but is that the answer that we were looking for? BGP, of course, stands for the Border Gateway Protocol. That is BGP. That is the dynamic protocol that is what we refer to as an exterior gateway protocol. That means it's a dynamic protocol that you commonly use to communicate with an exterior entity. It's not something you would commonly use on the internal part of your network. That means, kind of fits into the scenario that we were discussing here. BGP was something that was quickly sketched out to solve a problem with internet routing, and it turned out to be one of the most popular routing protocols that we use. If you're connecting to an ISP and you're using dynamic routing, then you're probably using BGP. That's what your ISP is using by default. You may not be using a dynamic routing protocol. I connected hundreds of different firewalls and connections to the internet through my career, and sometimes we just do static routing. That's our only route to the internet. That's our only connection to the internet. This would obviously be maybe a small, medium, or maybe a starter size large enterprise that just had a single network connection to the internet. You could get away with static routing there. In fact, static routing probably one of the easiest things to configure because it's a single command. You set up the route and you're done. There's no other options there. BGP gives you a lot more functionality though. You can connect multiple connections to multiple ISPs. You can load balance between in some scenarios. You can have failovers between them. There's a lot of great capabilities built into these dynamic routing protocols that might lean us towards using that rather than using something like a static route. And it's certainly worth the time to understand what those advantages and disadvantages might be, because that's something you might want to configure on your network when you connect it to the internet. Now, if it's a single connection to the internet, you don't have any other connections, there's no other alternative routes, maybe BGP is a little bit of overkill, but it's still an important topic to know for your Network Plus exam. And this is not the only dynamic routing protocol you need to be familiar with. Make sure you're familiar with all of them. This is from my video in section 2.1. The video name is Dynamic Routing is what we would use. And indeed, a lot of the answers on this question were dynamic routing protocols. Some were not, however. Let's step through them. 15% of you said EIGRP. That is a dynamic routing protocol. The EIGRP is very commonly associated with Cisco routers, but EIGRP is supported in some other routers as well. But anytime you see EIGRP, it's an interior gateway protocol, so very commonly used on the inside of our network. And when you see EIGRP, you can almost immediately assume that they're running a Cisco infrastructure on the inside of their network. Doesn't always mean that, but there's a pretty solid case there, certainly. 9% of you said OSPF. OSPF, the Open Shortest Path First protocol, is one that is commonly used on external connections, but mostly on the inside of a network. Your ISP is almost exclusively going to be using BGP for its connections, but there have been times when I've been connecting two companies together. In that case, it's sort of a pseudo internal external connection. You've got a little bit more flexibility, and maybe OSPF is what you would use on the inside of your network instead of using something like EIGRP. Same thing might apply for RIP version 2, the Routing Information Protocol, a relatively outdated protocol at this point. It is not quite as effective or efficient as some of the newer or more established dynamic routing protocols. RIP v2, though, have been around forever. It has been around for so long that perhaps it's a little outdated given our modern network requirements, but still a valid routing protocol and something that would be useful to know for your Network Plus exam objectives. And lastly, we have ICMP. The only answer here, that was not a routing protocol. The Internet Control Message Protocol is more of a management protocol that's used under the surface of IP. Anytime you're doing a ping, for example, the actual protocol used for that ping is probably ICMP. That is the default for most ping programs. Although some pings allow you to modify that a bit, ICMP is what we generally consider to be the default when you are using the ping command. You send an ICMP request, and what you're hoping to see is an ICMP response back to your computer. Obviously, you don't see that. All you see is the front end of ping. The ping utility is the thing looking for that specific protocol. Only 8% of you chose that one, which is good because that is also not the correct answer. The one we were looking for was the one that 59% of you chose, which is BGP. I know we're at the top of the hour, but let's keep going. Let's do another question. Let's try to fit another one in before we run out of time here. This next question on our list, a firewall question. Well, sort of a firewall question. It's one that asks, a network map shows traffic consistently forwarded through firewall A, while firewall B remains idle but powered on. Which of the following best describes this network design? Is this dual-homed, asymmetric routing, active-passive, east-west, or load balancing? A network map shows traffic consistently forwarded through firewall A, while firewall B remains idle but powered on. Which of the following best describes this network design? Is it dual-homed, asymmetric routing, active-passive, east-west, or load balancing? I guess technically it could be all of them, but only one would of those answers best describes the design listed in the actual question. This is an important part of this exam, by the way, that if you are working through these questions, we sometimes let ourselves keep thinking about the question and what it's doing. Well, in my network, I would set it up this way. And on my network or the networks I've worked with, we've done it. That we aren't asking a question about your network. We're not asking a question about networks you may have worked on. This question has a very specific scenario. And on the exam, don't let yourself get thinking about, well, in my network, I would do it this way. Because really, they are focusing in on a very specific issue here, which is this network map. So make sure that you consider what's listed in the question. Perhaps even more importantly, do not consider things that are not listed in the question. If they're not listed in the question, they're probably not listed for a reason. Another one of those things to think about. So let's see how you did with this one. A lot of people locking in on this one, which I think maybe we know this one really, really well. We're about to find out. And as someone who has spent a lot of my career as a firewall systems engineer, I'm hoping we do really well on this one. The question again asks, a network map shows traffic consistently forwarded through firewall A, while firewall B remains idle but powered on. Which of the following best describes this network design? Is it dual-homed, asymmetric routing, active-passive, east-west, or load balancing? Let's find out what you chose. We will close our poll. 76% of you say the answer is active-passive. Now what we really have to find out is, did we choose the right one in this question? We have 12% that said load balancing is what's happening there. 9% of you said asymmetric routing is what we are doing. 3% said this is dual-homed. And then east-west, only 0% of you, exactly 0% of you said that that is not the answer that we were looking for. As I mentioned, on this network, all of these things could be going on. This may be a firewall that is dual-homed. It may be performing asymmetric routing. It may be active-passive. It may be sending traffic through east-west communication, and it may be doing load balancing. But again, that wasn't the question. The question says that we have traffic consistently forwarded through firewall A, and firewall B is just sitting there. It's idle. It's powered on. It's configured, but it's not doing anything. And in that scenario, we are talking about an active-passive configuration. This is something commonly seen when you have redundant systems in place, where one device is the one really doing the work, and the other device just sitting there, not doing anything, completely idle. And you may be thinking to yourself, why would you do that? You have two devices. Wouldn't you run them both at the same time? Keep that in mind. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Let's talk about this scenario where you have one device that is active and the other one that is just sitting there passively waiting for the active device to fail. That's all that's really happening. It's just sitting there and waiting. Are you going to fail? Have you failed yet? I'm going to check in every second. And if you got to answer me back every second, are you still there? Yes. Okay, I'll wait. Okay, how about now? Are you still there? Yes. All right, I'll wait some more. Okay, how about now? Are you still? That's what happens constantly with these active passive devices. And as soon as we don't get an answer from that original device, from the active device, we say, are you there? We didn't hear anything. Let me ask again, are you there? Still didn't get anything. And maybe this device is configured after 3 queries and we're getting no response. We switch over to become active. So although it's sitting there idle and you think it's not really doing anything, it really is just waiting so that it can then take over. Hopefully so quickly that nobody even knows there was an outage to begin with. That's the objective on having this. At the very least, there's just a small delay and we're back up and running again, and you didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to flip a switch. You didn't have to manually select any changes. You didn't have to move anything around. Active passive is a very, very common way to configure. So here's our internet provider. We have 2 firewalls, one that is the active firewall and one that is the passive firewall. And then the rest of our network is on the inside, which is probably a router, a switch, other devices, a web server, a VPN concentrator, whatever it happens to be on the inside of our network. But this is a very common configuration for these firewalls. That means that most of our traffic is going to be going directly through our primary firewall and then back out again through that same primary firewall. Unless something happens, what if the power supply in that firewall fails? Well, then we're in trouble. And this is where our standby firewall, the one that is just sitting there as a passive device, realizes, wow, we lost our primary firewall. I'm now the active. And it takes over. And now all of the traffic coming to and from the internet is now going to go through the backup device. That is the idea behind active passive. Now, you might even be thinking, well, why don't you just set it up so that both of these firewalls are active all the time? We bought 2 firewalls. We're paying maintenance on 2 firewalls. Why don't we use both firewalls and be able to send traffic through both of them simultaneously? It makes perfect sense from a money perspective. Also makes perfect sense from an efficiency perspective, or does it? Because the moment that you turn on 2 separate firewalls, you now start creating a much more complex configuration. Now you have different ways. Traffic could come in one way and go out a completely different way. Firewalls don't like that very much. Firewalls are watching all the traffic go out one way, and they're only allowing that traffic to come back through that same firewall. So there has to be constant communication between these devices if both of them are active at the same time. And that would be active-active. We also talk about active-active firewalls in our video. That would be section 3.3, and the video is network redundancy if you wanted to learn more about those. So there's a bit more engineering that goes on to configure an active-active configuration, but you can, if you understand how it works, you understand the limitations for troubleshooting, you understand the limitations for traffic, and you understand there are certain configurations that must be set up if you're doing active-active versus active-passive. Something to consider. Now, there is other answers here that would not be right. Load balancing, well, in that scenario we were looking at, there's no load balancing going on. We have a single load coming through the network, and if we lose a firewall, it simply shifts to the other firewall. So it's not really balancing the load, it's simply maintaining uptime and availability. In fact, we get no balancing at all through here. That's one of those that is something you would really want to consider if you're working through this connection is how much traffic is going through any firewall at any particular time. That's why if you're configuring an active-passive configuration, and technically an active-active one as well, both of these firewalls should be able to handle the entire load of the link if only one of them is running. That's pretty obvious on active-passive, but it's really not quite as obvious on active-active. You have to consider if you lose a firewall, everything gets moved to the other one. So you still have to engineer them to support the entire network. So it would not be load balancing in that scenario. Asymmetric routing is the configuration I described earlier, where traffic may be coming in one connection and it might be going out through a completely different router. That is not symmetric routing, that's asymmetric routing. And that adds a lot of complexity to the routing side, or at least relatively more complex than something that is a symmetrically routed configuration, because your firewalls have to keep that in mind. They have to know that if traffic came in this way, that it might go out the other way, and not to block it. If you don't configure your firewalls properly, that will be something that will certainly occur on an asymmetrically routed configuration. But that does not describe what we were doing here. It's not asymmetric routing if there's only one route. Firewall A is active, firewall B is idle, can't get through firewall B. It's not doing anything. It's blocking everything at that point. So asymmetric routing is not occurring, and we know that because firewall B is simply idle. We also have 3% of you said that dual-homed firewall. A dual-home firewall is one that's connected to multiple connections. This dual-homed firewall may be connected to two ISPs, for example. That was not the scenario listed in this question. As I mentioned, your firewall might be dual home, but that's not what is described here. We're describing one firewall being active and one firewall being passive. That really is the one that best describes what we have in this question. And 0% said east-west describes this network design. This describes how traffic is sent in the same data center. East-west traffic is normally sent from one device inside of the data center to another device that is also inside of that same data center. So it never leaves the data center. We refer to that as east-west traffic. If this is traffic that's coming from or being directed to your data center, and you're communicating to a device that is outside of your data center, we refer to that as north-south traffic. So a little bit different. The scenario might be different depending on the traffic patterns, but east-west and north-south don't describe the implementation of different firewall configurations and for the redundancies of that firewall. That means that the only answer here that really makes sense, the one that is the correct answer for what we're doing, is the one that we have here. Active passive is the answer that we were looking for. And if you selected that one, you got it absolutely correct. Now, all these topics in here, and I've seen the chat rooms even been watching as we went through this, all of these topics that we've been discussing are from the CompTIA exam objectives. So as I mentioned, anything we've been discussing today, if it was part of the question, it certainly is part of the exam objectives. But as I've already mentioned, the answers are also coming directly from the exam objectives. Those exam objectives are available on the CompTIA website, and they're free. They list every single topic you need to know before you step into that exam room. This is one of the top questions I get, which is, how do I know when I'm really ready to take this exam? Well, how well do you know the official set of objectives? CompTIA sticks to this list on their exam practically 100%. It is so accurate to the exam that if you know everything listed in this document, you can't help but pass your exam. You know everything that's going to be presented in front of you, and you'll be able to answer every single question they provide during that exam. Those objectives, again, are free. They're on the CompTIA website. You can find those at professormesser.com/objectives. That'll be a good place to go and download the latest set of exam objectives. We do one of these study groups every month, and we are right in the middle of our study group session right now. Our first hour, I ask you questions. In the second hour, you ask me questions. So something to consider as we're sitting here today, but we do one of these every month. We have a Security Plus study group next week. I think it's Wednesday of next week. You can check the calendar to make sure. We, of course, have a Network Plus study group already scheduled for August. We have A Plus study groups on the 4th and the 6th. We have Network Plus currently scheduled for the 12th, and Security Plus in August will be on the 19th. So already we know at least 2 dates for Security Plus that are coming up very soon. These are all available on my calendar. And in fact, these sometimes will change. These dates sometimes move around. So if you're ever watching this video and we're well past August, or you're coming up on these dates for August and you're wondering, are we really doing this study group tomorrow? You can always go out to that official link, professormesser.com/calendar, and it will tell you exactly when the latest updates are. That is the first place I go when I make a change. So make sure you're very familiar with that link. It's also, there is an events link from the top of my website, takes you also to the calendar. I also need to update my August dates on that calendar. We haven't done that yet. That gives me something to do this weekend because, I was just going to sit around. There wasn't much going on. Sure. Well, speaking of sitting around, you should do that for the next hour because I'm going to answer your questions next. Stick around for our after show. We always have a good time there. Don't forget about our course notes, our complete success bundle, and so much more on our website. Go to professormesser.com/netsuccess. Of course, don't pay full price for your vouchers. Don't go to the CompTIA website and pay full price. Get the same voucher on our website, professormesser.com/vouchers, but at a discount. That's something only available for those in U.S. or Canada or U.S. territory, but it can save you a little bit of money if you're planning to take your Network Plus exam. And of course, if you're on social media, we can find you there as well. We have our 24/7 chat available on our Discord at professormesser.com/Discord. All of our videos for every single course we do is available on our YouTube channel at professormesser.com/YouTube. And of course, we have our weekly Network Plus pop quiz questions. Those are also available. You'll find those at professormesser.com/X/Instagram/Facebook and other places as well, or I'll send them directly to your email. You can sign up on the Professor Messer website. Well, that brings us to the end of the first hour of our study group. Stay exactly where you are. In just a few seconds, we will start our Network Plus after show. Thank you so much for joining us in this first hour. We will see you next time on the Network Plus study group. All right, I'm going to take a sip here. One moment. Okay. Now, let's do something that I'm completely unprepared for because this is the part of the study group that intentionally I do not prepare for because this is the one where I need you to submit questions to me. I know in this last hour, this has been me presenting you with questions. Well, now let's do that. Now let's really go through the process of really looking at this and let's do some Q&A. We have a lot that we can go through to be able to see the configurations of this. One of the things that I've been working with here, and this is one where I need to, of course, put this up on my screen too, is I want you to submit questions to me for this second hour. You can do this at any time. I will be moderating the questions on my side. There's your link. And you simply use that same link we've been using this whole time, professormesser.com/QA. I will go through the list. We'll see what questions you happen to have. There's one in the chat room. We can just start off with a question as I am sort of pouring through the questions that you have submitted already. The questions that we have here in the chat room is how many subnetting questions typically show up on the Network Plus exam? I would like to give you a perspective of that question that is in our chat. And I want to do that by going to the exam objectives. I think it gives the best context by looking at the exam objectives. So let's pull that up right here. I have the objectives already loaded. There they are. The N10-009, the current Network Plus exam objectives. Now, for those of you that have not gone through the objectives before, the first page tells you about Network Plus, gives you details about the exam. Here's the version number, how many questions you get, the length of the exam, and it gives you a breakdown of the 5 different domains that are covered during this exam: networking concepts, network implementation, network operations, network security, and network troubleshooting, and then the percentage that you will find distributed on the actual exam. Now, in reality, of course, the exam randomizes all of the questions that you're going to present, but they do tend to stick with this distribution of these 5 different domains. Now, let's find out what type of topics are covered in these 5 different domains. For example, in 1.0 networking concepts, you got section 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. We keep going, 1.5, 6, 7, and 1.8. So a lot of different topics, and you can see the detailed list of topics that are here. This is a remarkable document, by the way. You do not get this level of detail from many other IT industry certification providers. Microsoft doesn't give you this level of detail. Cisco doesn't give you this level of detail. Red Hat does not give you this level of detail. Amazon, nobody gives you sort of a bullet by bullet breakdown of everything you need to know. It's very unusual to find. So this is something you should absolutely take advantage of. For example, I've had people come into our chat that says, I'm taking a Network Plus course. My Network Plus course trainer gave me a list of 120 ports I need to memorize. I said, well, that's close to the actual number. It's just inflated by 100 because there's really only about 20 ports you need to know for the exam. They're listed in the official exam objectives. This is the only list you need to know. You don't need to memorize outside the scope of this list or outside the scope of this document in general. CompTIA sticks to this list like glue. So why would you want to bother memorizing another 100 different port numbers? It's unnecessary, and ultimately for your exam, it is unnecessary and something you don't need to know. Now, obviously, when you're in a role where you're doing networking, there might be a need to know other port numbers. We're not talking about your life outside the scope of this exam. We're really talking about this particular exam and what is expected of you. So when we go to that question about subnetting, if you read through all of the different bullets that are on here, none of these talk about subnets yet. In fact, we have transmissions, media and transceivers. We've got network topologies. Hey, here's a section down here, section 1.7. Given a scenario, use appropriate IPv4 network addressing. Public versus private. We need to know what API-PA is, RFC 1918, and loopback/localhost. Finally, we get to something that is subnet specific. For subnetting, they spell it out. You need to understand variable length subnet mask. You need to understand classless interdomain routing function CIDR. So you need to understand VLSM and CIDR. In this document, that is, here's the first 2 pages. The next 2 pages, this one happens to have the subnetting piece on it. Here's the next 2 pages. Now we're in domain 2, the section of domain 2. Domain 3, more hundreds of bullets that we're looking at. Section 4 and domain 5, and finally the last part of domain 5. So in all of this set of exam objectives, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of topics you need to know. 2 of them deal with subnetting. That's it. That's it. So from a distribution on your exam, you could probably, if you do the math, you could probably get 1 subnetting question. There might be 2 subnetting questions. If the random number generator was really bad for you, maybe you had 4 subnetting questions. But you also could get 0. There's so few connections in here regarding subnetting that you might not get any subnetting questions. And we have gotten reports before, although technically I guess it was a violation of their Canada agreement. People have emailed me and said, I didn't get any subnetting questions in my exam. That does happen. So now this is a little bit different. If you were taking an exam that was a firewall exam, you're taking a switching or a routing exam, a lot of that exam is probably going to be subnetting. Subnetting is a valuable thing you should know. It's essential for IP and really network management in general. If you're getting into networking or really doing anything connected to a network, it's very useful if you understand subnetting. If you're going to be managing switches, routers, firewalls, and other devices, it's required. You have to know subnetting. And it seems like subnetting would be very complicated. If you start getting into it, there's math involved and binary and decimal, and it can be challenging to sort of parse out how to do the subnetting quickly. And we have different methods that we can use and show you with our video series. You probably see that we go through all of the different ways to do it manually. Then I also describe 2 of the probably most popular shortcuts for subnetting. One of them is the magic number method, and the other one is a 7-second subnetting method. I use the 7-second subnetting method because there's no math involved. There's no powers of 2 that you need to memorize. Effectively, all you need to know is how to subtract 1 and how to add 1. That's right up my alley during an exam. The reason I created that particular shortcut is because during an exam, I can't think. I can't do math. I can barely do the math when I'm not in the middle of exam. And when I'm in the middle of an exam, I really need to be able to calculate these subnets accurately without messing something up with my powers of 2, which I'm just apt to do. So that's why when I took my own switching and routing certification exams and my own firewall certification exams, I was able to subnet very, very, very quickly. And in some cases, half the exam was subnetting. Fortunately, Network Plus, not that way at all. You might get one question, you might get two, you might get zero. So you'll have to take that into account as you do your studying, because exams like this can be very, very challenging, very stressful. You need to set yourself up with a way that you can easily answer some of these more complex questions using whatever shortcut makes sense for you. And after a while, when you start working with IP networks and you start doing a lot of subnetting, you start working a lot with certain subnet masks, you will start to automatically recognize them and do everything in your head. So the shortcuts that we're providing with the magic number method and the 7-second subnetting method are not things that you would very commonly do when you're in the middle of designing or creating a new network. You would really just do it in your head, because after a while, you'll find that it just becomes so natural to the subnetting. If you're just getting started with subnetting, you don't believe me. You don't think that it's possible to do this in your head, but it really is. It's the same as memorizing someone's phone number. It's the same thing as memorizing your social security number or an address. You start to remember it naturally and you understand what those are. I used to manage a network that was a 255.255.255.192 subnet. So it had a /26 subnet mask. Now calculating a /26, either doing it manually or using a shortcut, you have to kind of parse everything out and figure it out. But because I worked on that network for so long, I already know where all of the different parses, the different subnet limitations are. I know that the first subnet is 64, the next subnet is going up to 128, the next one's going up to 192, and the next one's going up to 255. So I already know there are 4 networks that I can parse out of one single part of that. So that's a good example of how that's just stuck in your head. And now I can just parse those out whenever I want. Now, my network at home, it's what we call a Class C. I know that's sort of colloquial to call it that, but that's sort of the way we can quickly describe a 255.255.255.0 network. So I run a 10-dot network at home with a Class C subnet, and that's what I run everywhere. And I've got, I think, 4 or 5 different VLANs that I've configured on that network, each VLAN obviously with a different IP subnet, and then I route everything together with a centralized router. So I can have my office on one subnet. I can have my house on another subnet. I can have my cameras, my security cameras on a different subnet. And I can have IoT devices on a 4th subnet, so that I can keep everything separate and maybe at least limited as to what those devices can do on the inside of my network. The exam objectives are valuable. Someone in the chat room was saying, where did this come from? Where did this document with all of these juicy details, where'd they come from? They came from the CompTIA website. ProfessorMesser.com/objectives would be the easiest way for you to find these. I'll give you links there that take you directly to that. I guess I could even show you if we were to bring that up, because this is a visual medium. I'm just saying we can make that happen. www.professormesser.com/objectives will bring you to this page. And on the objectives page, you have links to the A+ objectives, the Network Plus objectives, the Security Plus objectives, or any of the certifications. And they are all listed there. I think they moved the red box now. I think it's more closer to the top of the screen. Let's find out. Let's click on Network Plus objectives since we're here. Takes us over to the CompTIA website. And you can see here that red box, they've now stuck to the right side of the screen. So on a bigger screen, I guess if you're on mobile, it'll still be on that page somewhere. You're looking for the red box. You want to put your email address in there, click that you agree, and you can download the objectives directly from that link. And notice that you have English objectives, German, Japanese, and Portuguese. Oh, there's Spanish in here as well. So you've got plenty to go through, depending on where you happen to be in the world, depending on how your local languages might require you to take an exam. All on the CompTIA website. It's free to download. You need this document if you don't have it already. It's a perfect document to go through before you start your studies. It's also a great document to use as a checklist before you plan on taking your exam, because it can really point out information, topics, bullets of things that maybe you missed studying, maybe you didn't study it, maybe you only studied a little bit, might remind you, I should read up on that one before going into the exam room. Have a look at that. That's a great way to manage the process. And if you're someone who is preparing for your exam, they're effectively telling you what's going to be asked of you. What a great document to get your hands on. Let's keep going through the questions that you have submitted. We've got quite a few that have been sent in. The next question on our list is from Andrew. The question from Andrew asks, how important is it for a student planning on a cybersecurity career to get their Network Plus? Well, if we interpret cybersecurity specifically, I can probably answer this question. Cybersecurity is such a broad term. On our Discord chat, we've sort of referred to this as, I'm getting into medicine. Should I learn how to do this particular thing? That's how broad cybersecurity is. Well, you need to be more specific. Do you mean that you're going to be a doctor? You're going to be a nurse? You're going to be a nurse working in a lab? Are you going to be drawing blood? Are you going to be transportation? Medicine's a big place, and cybersecurity is a big place. You could be working on development of applications or troubleshooting applications or building applications. That's not generally what we do with our Network Plus and Security Plus exam. So I'm going to interpret this as IT security. You're in charge of firewalls. You're in charge of VPNs, certificates. You're collecting log file data. You're sifting through that data to see if there's anything unusual or concerning. Maybe you're also pushing out patches. Maybe you are managing connectivity between different sites. You've set up VPNs, IPsec VPNs, site-to-site VPNs. Maybe you have end-user VPNs that you manage. You have multi-factor authentication you manage. There's a lot there on the IT security side. And IT security is a lot like understanding everything you need to know about everything. Coming from the IT security world myself, I found that I extensively used knowledge of operating systems and knowledge of networks to be able to make decisions about the things that we're doing in IT security. Let's take an example of that. We were talking earlier in the study group about firewalls and how you could set up a firewall to be active-passive, or you could set up a firewall to be active-active. Whenever we were working with customers that were implementing a new firewall configuration, almost everybody is purchasing two firewalls. Whether you are putting them in an active-passive or active-active, you need two firewalls to make that happen. Very rarely, if ever, do I recall a company only purchasing a single firewall. And it sort of makes sense. If you are putting in a single firewall and that firewall fails, well, that's it. You're down. Your company is no longer communicating to the internet. And these days, that's something people simply cannot tolerate. So they would always plug in one way or the other. I would say 90 to 95% of most of those implementations were active-passive. That may not be what you were expecting. Some people were thinking, well, you got two firewalls, just run them both at the same time. But there are some significant pieces of knowledge and engineering concern that go into an active-active configuration. We talked about some of it earlier. Some of it was asymmetric routing. That can be a problem. Some networks can tolerate that better than others. Some configurations that are active-active, you have to worry about the communication between the firewalls. So that kind of limits you to have those two firewalls relatively close to each other, certainly within the same data center, although there were some implementations where we did an active-active configuration between data centers. Not exactly recommended, because if you lose the link between those two firewalls, both of those firewalls think the other firewall has failed. And so now both of them go into an active mode. We call that a split brain. And that is not a good situation. As the name implies, splitting your brain, not a good idea. And so that's why there's a very specific set of engineering that goes around active-active. Active-passive, so much easier. Easier to configure, easier to manage, easier to troubleshoot. And that's one of the reasons that people will simply buy a firewall that can support everything and send all of that traffic through a single device. That is a good example of how working at that level and integrating that firewall with Active Directory making sure that firewall can route properly through your network, maybe even setting up network address translation through that firewall. You're maybe even configuring a dynamic routing protocol like BGP. Maybe you're also setting up site-to-site VPNs that are sending the data based on the destination IP route to that particular site. All of those things I just mentioned, those like 5 or 6 things I just went through, were all networking tasks. There was really no security there other than you were configuring it on a firewall, but configuring how you were connecting to your internal routed network, how you were setting up dynamic routes, how you were configuring a route-based VPN connection, how you were setting, all of these things are just IP configurations. They're all networking configurations. And so, and I also mentioned integration to Active Directory. You're now integrating into an operating system. So understanding and having a very solid, if not expert level knowledge of how operating systems work, and having an expert level knowledge of how networks operate down to the protocol level will certainly both give you a lot of the skills you need to bring to the table if you're interested in IT security. Those are the things that are most important. You generally start on that side. You generally start with operating systems and networking and work up into IT security. That's why we often will mention, we mentioned in other study groups, is that people all the time come to me and say, I'm taking a course on cybersecurity. I'm getting a degree in cybersecurity. I'm becoming an expert in cybersecurity, whatever that is. And I'm coming out of school and I need a job immediately in cybersecurity. And I of course ask, what is your experience with operating systems and what knowledge do you have with networking? You have none, because I haven't done any of that yet. Well, then you're not ready for cybersecurity. You're not ready for the IT security world quite yet. And that is something I think the internet's done a very bad job at. I don't want to say fooling people, but you're sort of leading people down a path that if you study Security Plus, if you study security related topics, you can go get a security related job. Well, you could eventually. I guess it's not wrong, but first you need this other foundational knowledge. You need to build a knowledge in operating systems. Learn as much as you can about Windows. Learn as much as you can about Linux. Learn as much as you can about Mac OS, about iOS, about Android. Learn as much as you can about those. Learn how to manage them. Learn how to deploy applications to those. Learn about the security settings. How do those different operating systems handle security at the file system, handle security for authentication, handle security for storing data. Once you know that, you can now move to the networking side. And the networking side, you understand how the network communicates. You understand IP routing. You understand the protocols that are going back and forth and how they operate. How does TCP look differently than UDP when you're looking at a protocol decode? And how does it affect devices differently when that traffic is going across the network? Understanding how applications talk at a protocol level gives you a perspective of the world that you simply don't have without that knowledge. Understanding, you can almost watch when somebody's logging into an app, and behind the scenes, you can almost guess how the application is communicating and what it is communicating to, because you know how that works down at the protocol level. At that point, now that you've built a solid foundation in operating systems and you've stacked on top of that a solid foundation in networking, now you're ready for IT security. And I think that most people hiring for an IT security role are looking for those specific skills to have there. Now, as I mentioned also in other study groups, there are some jobs out there that don't require you to have an extensive knowledge of operating systems and extensive knowledge of networking, but they're generally, if you can call these entry-level positions into IT security, that's what they are. So you might be working the first level support. Maybe you're answering phones and answering emails for a security operations center, an SOC or a SOC. Security operations center, it's kind of like a help desk, but for security. So although you may be trying not to start at the help desk, you're really going to start at the help desk. Whether it's called a help desk or not, that's where you generally start in this industry, is down at a lower level, taking the basic questions, the basic problems people are having, solving the basic problems, learning about the technologies, and building yourself up to whatever that next level of your career is going to be. So if you're interested in Security, you should be very interested in operating systems. You should be very interested in networking because those are going to give you that leg up, the knowledge that you need, the foundation that you need to be able to then build on to reach that level of IT security. Hopefully that's given you some ideas of things you can think about when you get into that world of IT security or wanting to get into the world of IT security. Should be a good place to go. Let's keep going through this list. Earlier on in the study group, I gave you instructions on how you can earn a continuing education unit credit, a CEU. And Jay asks, after you get the CompTIA cert, when should you start collecting these continuing education units? When should you start doing this? Well, let's talk about the process. Let's talk about what you would do going through this process and how this works. When you take a Network Plus exam, for example, we'll take that as a good example in this case. You take your exam, you pass the exam, and you've now become Network Plus certified. The day you pass that exam, or the day you meet all of the requirements to earn that certification, if you're taking the A+, for example, you've taken the A+ Core 1 and the Core 2. For Network Plus, you passed the Network Plus exam. For the Security Plus, you passed the Security Plus exam. The moment you pass the exam, a timer starts, a 3-year timer. This is your timer for the validity of your certification. Your certification is valid for 3 years. After 3 years, your certification is no longer valid. That's it. There's a timer set up for that. Now, what CompTIA allows you to do is during that 3-year period, you can perform a series of tasks or a series of processes that will renew the certification. You don't have to take the tests ever again. You never have to sit down with the exam objectives ever again. You never have to go to the testing center ever again and take that exam again because you've already done that. Now you can simply renew it. And the renewal process is not quite as crazy as taking the exam again. Now, to be fair, one of the methods you can use to renew your certification is to take a newer version of the exam. I don't really think that's a renewal. I mean, it sort of is. Technically it is. But going through and taking the entire exam again is not what any of us want to do. I mean, you can, but you don't need to. There are other ways to renew your certification during that 3-year period. You can collect CEUs. There's a big list of things you can do on the CompTIA website that tells you how you can collect those CEUs and which categories they will accept and how many from each category. Sadly, you can't watch 40 of my videos and get 40 CEUs to renew your Network Plus. It doesn't work that way. You can maybe watch 7, but you have to do other tasks that will round out the renewal process. You can submit those CEUs to CompTIA. And I think for Network Plus, it's 40. For A+, it's 30. For Security Plus, it's 50. So it's a different number of CEUs you need, depending on what your highest level certification happens to be. And then there are other ways to renew too. You could take a course. You could take a third-party certification. You could take a higher level CompTIA certification. So if you've earned your Network Plus, you can take the Security Plus exam, which you might be planning to anyway, and that renews all of the lower level certifications you've earned. In this case, that would be Network Plus and A+. So you only have to renew the highest level cert that you've earned. They have a list of what that hierarchy is on the CompTIA website. So you can look through that and understand what certification allows me to renew others. They have a big matrix that breaks that down for you, so you'll know exactly what you're working towards. That's what I would recommend if you're trying to earn your certification. You've just earned your certification. You can immediately start collecting those CEUs. And if you have enough CEUs, the day after you take your exam, you suddenly are able to collect 40 CEUs somehow. That would be really difficult, but you could. If you do that, you've now renewed your certification for another 3 years. That's what the renewal does. It tacks on another 3 years. So in that scenario, if you use CEUs, you effectively now have 6 years of a certification. There's some value in doing something like that. Doesn't quite work that way if you're taking a higher level cert. So if you take your Network Plus and pass it, and you've earned your Network Plus certification, and then 3 months later, you take your Security Plus and pass it, it simply moves up that 3-year period for your Network Plus to match the renewal of your Security Plus. It doesn't add on another 3 years. It simply matches what the highest level is. So make sure you check the CompTIA website. There is documentation there, and they document everything to tell you how that will work. Go through that list. Go through the CompTIA website and read through the continuing education section. If you haven't seen it, we'll go back to the CompTIA website where we were. And if you go over to resources on the CompTIA website, oh, it's actually in the top, the resources on the CompTIA website, you'll see there's a breakdown of a lot of different pieces on here. I think they have in this list the breakdown of continuing education right here. So this tells you everything you need to know about continuing education. What do you need? Learn about the renewal process, choose your path, and submit your CEUs. They tell you everything on the website. That's all in the main menus at the top under resources. It's what you want. You just view all resources, scroll down to continuing education, and go from there. That's the best place to learn what you need to know to renew that certification that you've worked so hard to earn. Let's keep going through your list of questions. Thanks for sending this in. If you have a question you'd like to submit to me, you can do that at any time using that link on your screen, professormesser.com/QA. Let's keep going through this list. There's some in here that are repeated. So if I don't get to your specific question, you probably realize we sort of answered the question in a previous question that other folks have submitted. So I apologize for not hitting every single one here, but there's no need to duplicate our effort here. Let's talk about employers. Those crazy employers right now. It's a tough market for IT, but the market is still there. People are still hiring for IT. This question's from Cam, who asks, "Hi, Professor, do you think employers are looking for both the Network Plus and the A Plus for starting positions? Or do you think they're only looking for the A Plus?" And my answer to that is yes. There are some employers looking for A Plus. There's some employers looking for A Plus and Network Plus. There's some employers aren't looking for any certification. That's sad, but some are. There's a reason for some of this, by the way, where they are not looking for a specific cert. So the different employers have a different requirement. This may be a requirement that they have built internally, that everybody has to have a certain certification. Maybe they are working with a third party, and the third party requires that the people they hire have a certain certification. That's very common for companies that provide networking services for a third party. Maybe they require a certain certification. Some employers are not willing to pay you well, and therefore don't want somebody who's certified because they figure they can pay you less and you'll simply learn as you go. It's not a bad strategy from a business perspective. If you own a business, that might be a good way to get people in the door. They don't have a cert, but you're sort of training them as they go. I would think that would lead to more turnover, but maybe that's built into their business model. I mean, it's not an invalid way to consider hiring. One of the best things you can do, though, is to simply look at the job descriptions for that employer. See what they say they are hiring. Do they put a certification, a specific certification in the job posting? Go to your favorite job posting site. Go to dice.com, go to LinkedIn Jobs or whatever the most popular one. They tend to change on a daily basis, it seems, as to which ones are good and bad. And they are different depending on where you are in the world. So if you're in a different country, it might be a different website that is the popular website for job postings. In the job posting, there will be a breakdown of what they want from you. And sometimes they will specifically say, we're looking for someone with an A+. We're looking for someone with a Network Plus. We're looking for someone with Security Plus. Well, there you go. There's the answer of what an employer may be looking for. Sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't, but that's what they want. That's what they're wanting to big a check mark. Check. He's got that certification. Check. She's earned her Network Plus. So you at least know they have a particular requirement for that job posting. Sometimes it's something where they don't put it in the job description, but they like that you have it. So that's another one that's a little vague in understanding if it's a requirement or not. But as I like to say, having that extra certification in your pocket can be a big advantage when you're walking into a job interview. It may be something that really does help you. Unless, of course, you're walking into one of those companies that doesn't want you to be certified, but hopefully they would see the certification on your resume and not call you in for an interview unless you were someone they would be willing to hire. So it's one of those where you do have to do some due diligence yourself. You do have to make sure that you and the prospective employer are on the same page. If you do that, you're in pretty good shape. That may be a good place to go if you're working through understanding, do I need the cert? Do I not need the cert? Is it good to have it? Is it not good to have it? And in some cases, this might be something you feel out as you're going through the process. You might find that you do have a certification. They didn't ask you for it. Maybe in that scenario, you already know that employer doesn't hire Network Plus certified people. Just don't tell them. There's one way to get a job. So there might be things you can do with just a little bit more research that can help you determine how you position yourself for that particular job. That would be a kind of a corner case, I would hope. That would be unusual. I would think if somebody wanted you to have Network Plus, they just put it right there. And if you did have it, I don't think anybody would care very much from that. It's one of those where you do have to think about the way that it goes. Let's go through another question. We have more to go through. Thank you for sending these in. If you have a question, that's the link that is on your page here. Go to professormesser.com/QA, and you could do that as well. There are a number of questions that are in this list that you've submitted that say, for a performance-based question, could this be related to Ethernet standards? In this performance-based question, could there be subnetting in the performance-based question? In the performance-based question, could there be command lines there? And the answer is, if it is in the exam objectives, it can be on your exam. It could be a multiple choice question. It could be a performance-based question. Doesn't really matter. The performance-based questions are not some type of out-of-the-world style of question that you would be uncomfortable or surprised at when you sit down for the exam. In fact, some of the most common feedback I get from people who have taken these exams is they say, oh, I took my exam today. Boy, those performance-based questions were much easier than I thought they would be. I think in our minds, the fear of the unknown is a powerful thing. And we start to think about how bad it could be. Sort of the scenario when you hit your elbow and you think, ow, I really hit my elbow. I wonder if I have cancer. No, you just hit your elbow. You don't have to your mind doesn't have to go to the craziest thing that it is. But we tend to do that with performance-based questions. Oh, a performance-based question. I'm sure this is going to be some complex scenario with multiple chalkboards with wires between them. We've got connections between all of these. It's not as complicated as you think it's going to be. Every performance-based question is based on the official set of exam objectives. So yes, it could be talking about transceivers. It could be talking about subnetting. It could be talking about risk. It could be talking about troubleshooting. It could be command line. It could be anything that's in the official exam objectives. And that's why I tell you over and over, like a mantra, download the objectives, you need those objectives. They're incredibly important. And they will help you determine what could possibly show up on your exam. And as I mentioned, perhaps more importantly, tell you the things that will not appear on your exam, which in some cases is an even more important thing to know. There's a lot of really outdated and out of scope material on the internet. You have to be very diligent to make sure that you are not studying the wrong thing for your exam, and those exam objectives will keep you on track. Let's keep going through your list of things. Some great questions coming in this month, by the way. Thank you so much. A lot of things that are here. There's quite a bit that are on this list. This is, I think, if one of the things that I think I've run into often, I mentioned this in my video, but I think it's worth bringing again. Would you recommend a strategy to understand which devices belong to which layer of the OSI model? And this is one that, if you've not worked with the OSI model before, it has such a vague set of connotations, doesn't it? You're almost like trying to understand what the inside of a cloud is like. Not a networking cloud, an actual cloud. Trying to understand how a vague thing, how a model of an operation applies to something that is in the real world. And that can be a bit complicated if you've never worked or talked to people in OSI language before. Say OSI language. This happens all the time in the industry. Oh, the OSI model is the model we use universally to describe where data activities are occurring on a network. It is not you may have probably seen in other courses from other places, you might have seen the TCP/IP model, which makes sense that would be the model that we use, except we don't. The TCP/IP model, we do not use the model. We certainly use the TCP/IP suite of protocols, certainly do that. But the model that we use to describe how data flows across the network is a model based on a set of protocols that we don't use. The OSI is both actual protocols that at one time we did use, not a lot, but there was a use of them on our networks. We no longer use the OSI suite of protocols, TCP/IP1, but we still talk about the world in OSI terms. Is that confusing? Yes. Yes, it is. But understanding the OSI model that's not confusing at all. Understanding where things fit into the OSI model make perfect sense. And that's why I tell people, go through the videos. I think one of the things that helped me the most with understanding the OSI model, if you want to take it to the next level to really lock it down, and I mentioned this in my OSI video, is Wireshark. It's a protocol analyzer, specifically the summary protocol decodes inside of a protocol analysis tool. So if you have access to a sniffer, use that. If you have access to Wireshark, use that. Anything that does protocol analysis can help you understand more about the OSI model, because it will break down for you what's happening at the physical level, what's happening at the data link level, what's happening at the network level, what's happening at the transport layer. And you'll see those layers broken out visually inside of Wireshark. It will show you layer 1, the physical layer. It will show you layer 2, the data link layer. Show you the MAC addresses going back and forth. It will show you layer 3, the network layer, because you'll see the IP addresses going back and forth. It will show you the transport layer, layer 4, because it will show you TCP and UDP port number communication. So you see it so well laid out in a protocol decode that it tends to stick immediately. And you start to understand, oh, okay, so if anything operates at layer 2, it's really operating at a MAC address layer or a data link layer. In the world of Ethernet, in the world of wireless networking, that's our MAC address. So anything that is making a forwarding decision based on the MAC address is a layer 2 device. It's a layer 2 function. So whenever we're communicating with other networking professionals, we may say that, oh, we're doing some troubleshooting. Right now, layer 3 looks good, but we're running into a problem with certain layer 4 configurations. So from that description, you already know the IP part, maybe even the routing part works really well, but maybe something is being blocked based on a port number. Maybe your firewall is blocking something. Oh, something's not working at layer 4. Let me check my firewall configuration. So having that common language, I don't know what type of firewall you use. I don't know if you do any filtering at layer 4. I don't know if you are certain applications aren't communicating at layer 4. I don't know if you're preventing that using some type of packet filter. But all I have to say is layer 3 is working, but layer 4, I'm having a problem. I can interpret that on my side as, oh, layer 4, that could be the firewall. It could be our packet filter. It could be the proxy. It could be, only I know what's happening at layer 4 in my network. Somebody else, though, can at least give you a perspective of that. And that's the value of the OSI model, is having a common language that we can use to describe data flows without specifically knowing what type of equipment is out on either side of the communication. That's a little more complicated, a little more involved to do that. So my strategy for you to really break down and understand the OSI model at its most basic levels, at really more of a visual level, is to capture packets. And if you've never used Wireshark and captured packets and looked at them, you got to do that. You have to do that. That is an incredible skill to have. And I'm speaking of that as someone who spent almost 10 years at Network General. I was a boomerang. I was at Network General for a long time, then went away and then came back to Network General, because that ability to look at things at the protocol level is so powerful and so valuable. You will become a network expert if you can read a protocol decode. And I know if you ever look at the protocol decodes going by, it almost seems like the Matrix. Like, how am I supposed to understand this nonsense that's going by on the screen? But if you're inside of the Matrix and you're already accustomed to viewing it and you've become very familiar with what you're looking at on the screen, you can easily pick out things that other people simply don't see. It becomes almost second nature. It's also a very valuable way to understand, how do applications really work? How do routers really work? How does my switch really operate? All of that information is inside of those packet captures. And perhaps even more importantly, when something goes wrong, the first thing that tech support is going to ask you, do you have a packet capture of this? It's a universal truth. We need a packet capture because the ultimate truth is in the packets. Everything we need to know is inside of those packets. Every piece of bit and byte that is going back and forth between those devices, the time frames, the delays, any latencies, any errors, any corruption of the data, any retransmissions of the data, any of the packets coming in out of order, all of that's in the packet capture. And unless you have a packet capture, you're just guessing. Nothing drives me crazier than that, is walking into a problem and saying, here's a problem we're having, slow performance of an application. So we upgraded our router code. So we changed a firewall rule. And I said, well, why did you do that? We just guessed. We're just throwing stuff against the wall, and you're making changes based on no intel at all. You have no knowledge of really what's happening. You have to capture the packets, which is not only a valuable skill, that's what's really going to help you solidify those OSI challenges that you're going to run into. It will certainly help you with the troubleshooting, with understanding how OSI operates. What is the relationship between layer 1 and layer 2 and layer 3 and layer 4? You see it all in the packet capture. So Wireshark's free. So if you need some homework this weekend, that's what I would recommend you do. Go to the Wireshark website, wireshark.org, wireshark.org, there it is. The world's leading network protocol analyzer. Wireshark lets you dive deep into your network traffic, free and open source. Look, download now. Just download it. If you're on Windows x64, here's an ARM installer, Windows x64. There's my Mac OS Universal Disk Image. If you're running Linux, there's Ubuntu, and there's the source code. If you wanted to compile it yourself, don't bother doing that. What a mess that is. But it works. You can do that. So that latest version, download it, install it, just capture some packets. Go there, capture packets, look at some of the packets, see if you can figure out what you're looking at, and then capture some more and do it some more. Maybe even start the packet capture, ping 1.1.1.1. Go. Have it go through the entire ping, stop the capture, now go look at your ping. Now do the same thing with the trace route. Now go do the same thing with connecting to a web server. Now go do the same thing with different things you would do on the internet. Watch what happens. Was it 2 packets that went back and forth? Or was it 200 packets that went back and forth? Did you see the DNS resolution? Do a dig command. What happened? What type of protocols went back and forth? When you did the trace route, what type of packets went back and forth? When you simply use the applications you normally use, what type of protocols went back and forth? You might be surprised at just how much is going on your network link that you had no idea was happening. And what's even nicer about this helped you understand OSI. You're now learning more about the packets. These are valuable, valuable, valuable skills that you are going to use constantly throughout your career. So another one of those things that actually helps you a little bit. There's a good reason for doing it. There's a good use of your time is going through Wireshark. It is remarkable how valuable that can be. It can really save your bacon. It can solve problems instantly that other times could take you months to solve. And again, I'm speaking directly from a personal knowledge of this. Let's keep going through this list of things we can do. Well, let's talk about this one. This is a little bit corner case, but I think it's worth mentioning. Michael says, I got my A+ back in 2001. Michael, and you're still alive. This is great. This is fantastic. Michael says, it's my understanding that pre-2011, really it is 2011, I think is the date, is considered a lifetime cert, even though I'm unsure if they still honor that. I intend to take the Network Plus within the next few months. Will that automatically renew my A+? Let's talk about the A+ certification, the Network Plus certification. Let's talk about the difference between a GFL, good for life, certification, and a CE, continuing education certification. They are two different things. So the one that you're looking for, the term that you're looking for CompTIA is good for life. And what I'm going to go to is a CompTIA page here that says which CompTIA certifications must be renewed. And they talk about all of the certifications that require renewal from CompTIA. Now, they start with a description also of what needs to be renewed. They refer to these as the CompTIA Continuing Education Program, CE. If it's a CE certification, it has to be renewed every 3 years. This is something that was a requirement that based on a worldwide ISO standard. So CompTIA didn't necessarily want to do certification renewals, but the ISO standard the worldwide standard for IT certifications requires you, if you want to be ISO certified, it must require ongoing maintenance, ongoing renewals of that certification to keep you up to date with the latest technologies. And as you can imagine, that could be important. There is a note here at the bottom. CompTIA certifications, GFL, good for life. Some CompTIA certifications are considered good for life, meaning they do not need to be renewed and will never expire. However, these certifications are based on the exam objectives at the time they were earned and may not, let me tell you, they will not reflect the most current industry standards. And it tells you if you earned your A+, Network Plus, or Security Plus certification prior to January 1st, 2011, that was really the right date. That was just a typo in the message. The certification is considered GFL and does not expire. So yes, I have my GFL A+ certification from back in the day, and that certification never expires. It's always good as an A+ cert. Here's the problem. Employers don't want a GFL cert. Now, why would that be? I passed it in 2011. It's only 2026. It's only been 15 years. What could have possibly changed in this industry? What? There's cloud. What's cloud technology like? Oh, what? There's AI. What's that like? Oh, there's 10 gig networks. What are, okay. So you can start to see why having a renewable, constantly available set, constantly evolving set of exam objectives would be useful. And that's why employers, when they these days ask you to have an A+ certification, a Network Plus certification, or Security Plus certification, or others, may what they really want is the CE version. And some employers will spell it out. We want you to have a Network Plus CE so that you really know that's what they want. Nobody's really asking for GFL certs. Are you certified? Back to the question, does CompTIA still consider you certified? Yeah, they even say right here, you were certified prior to January 1st. Your cert is GFL, does not expire. Now, in 2011, when they made that conversion from GFL to CE, there was about a 1 year time frame. It was 1 or 2 years where if you had the GFL A+, you could take a higher level cert like the Network Plus or Security Plus, or you could renew your existing A+, if I recall properly. And when you did that, it would take your GFL cert and create a new CE cert to go along with it. So you almost had both at the same time. You had your older GFL, because that never goes away, but they would grandfather you in to a CE cert because you were able to renew it or get a higher level certification. And that allowed people to simply build on and continue renewing their older certification by updating it to CE and then renewing it every 3 years. The problem, though, is they only did that for a couple of years. So back to that question that was asked earlier, that question, see if I can find it here from Michael, that hopefully makes you understand, yes, that lifetime cert is still valid. Nobody wants it. So it's no good, really. You need a more modern cert. But the question of will that automatically renew my A+, there's your problem, is that it will not renew a GFL. Taking and earning a CE certification does not renew a GFL certification any longer. It hasn't been that way for 13, 14 years, somewhere in there, somewhere like that, 12 years. So it's been a while. You missed your window by only 12 years in this particular case. So unfortunately, no, you can't get an A+, technically not a renewal because your GFL is good for life, but it won't convert it to CE, doesn't turn it into a newer A+. And there's no way to do that other than going back and taking the new A+, the latest A+ certification exams. So you would need to take the Core 1 and Core 2 exam to earn your A+ CE, and then you could renew it by taking the Network Plus. But because you don't currently have a CE, it does not get renewed. It does not get created. There's no way to get the A+ CE now unless you take both of the A+ exams and pass both of those. So sorry that part of that doesn't work out. The good part is you are A+ certified. Maybe you do find an employer that will take your good for life A+. You can always ask them. They might say, oh, sure, GFL, it's fine with us. Maybe I misunderstand the market and they know better than I do. So they're the ones hiring you after all. Find out from them. Maybe they'll tell you, oh no, you really need a CE. We really mean CE, not GFL, not technologies from 15 years ago. We need you to understand, Windows 11, not Windows 7. So that's the challenge you run into because time marches on, technology changes. And that's one of the reasons we have that global standard, that ISO standard for certifications, because technology moves so quickly. We want to be sure that someone who is certified keeps the latest set of technologies in their brain, that they're really, really qualified to be able to handle those technologies, not something from 15 years ago, which sort of makes sense. Sort of. I know we're past the top of the hour. Let's squeeze in another one quickly, please. I did mention earlier, and there were a few questions that came through about our calendar. We have an events calendar on our website at professormaster.com/calendar. I will be updating that this weekend with all of our August dates, if I've not already. I don't think I have. But we can certainly go out there. Maybe I could look at my website and actually tell in the events view of this. No, I don't have the August dates in there quite yet. But if you go to there, probably after this weekend, I'll have the August dates up. I also keep event dates updated on our Discord. There's an events channel, so you can go there. And I also update that every time I update the main events calendar. So both of those are great places to go to know when the next events are going to be. And I don't think I've updated my Discord yet with the new dates either. No, I've not. So the next event on our list is the Security Plus Study Group on Wednesday, the 22nd. That's next week. And then this weekend, I'll make sure we have all of our August dates up as well. I know we're past top of the hour. Maybe I can squeeze in one more before my voice gives out, or before. I haven't looked at the weather at this point to know if we're getting the rain yet. For those of you that were here earlier, we talked about this in the pre-show. I showed sort of the rain that was here and the rain. Oh my. Okay. Let's go to the Google. What did I pull up before? It was it was named the Google weather map or something. Let's see if I can find out where that was. I may have to go to my history, which quite honestly, I'm not sure I can do very quickly in going through all of this, but it would be one of those things to look at. But I definitely have limited time available. I could sort of hear the thunder out my, maybe it might miss it. It might be going away from me. But in any case, let's see if we can fit through another question before we run out of time. And I'm hearing, and you probably can't hear it in the mic, but I'm hearing the thunder outside, which I think is going to miss my studio, but definitely it's in the area. So let's do one more. So with that, let's do one more. We talked about certs and the things that we were doing. Oh, here's a good one. We sort of breached this a little bit. Let's talk about my good friend Anonymous, who says, I just passed Network Plus a few days ago. First, congratulations, my good friend Anonymous, which I already knew because we're such good friends. Do you have any recommendations for home labs? Thanks, Professor. I have a few recommendations, especially on the networking side. The networking side is good. We already mentioned one of those. Wireshark is a great use of your time and working through what we need to know from a protocol perspective. How does the network work? How does TCP work? What is this TCP acknowledgement that we've always talked about? What if we saw one and it's in your protocol decode? That's one thing you could spend months, years trying to figure out, trying to optimize, trying to learn everything there is to know about that particular world. I loved working at Network General because there was such an emphasis at the protocol level, and then we could stack all of other applications on top of that. The other thing that I find good for home labs, especially on the networking side, are things that might be related to firewalls. You know, firewalls really, we think of it as a security tool. It's almost more of a networking appliance than a security tool. So if you can set up and build a open source firewall and set it up on an actual, either a virtual machine or set it up on an actual system where you can physically send the traffic through that firewall, you could start working through reports. You can start understanding what type of traffic is really going through your network. You can really start to get a perspective of what different firewall rules do to the traffic. How does browsing on the internet change if you modify some of those rules in your firewall? That would be a fun one to do as well. I think anytime you're working with firewalls, maybe even have an IPS piece kind of layered into that, those would be a lot of fun. And maybe there are ways you can even cause the IPS to fire because you're running Nmap. There's another great tool to learn as much as you can about is Nmap. I don't think it's officially part of the exam objectives anymore, though, is it? Did they take it out of the Network Plus? They dropped a lot in the latest version because there was just too much in there already. Nmap is still in there, so definitely learn about Nmap. We talk about it very broadly in the videos because in the exam objectives, it is a broad description they're talking about. But Nmap is a very detailed application. Prior to doing my ProfessorMester.com videos, I wrote a book on Nmap. So I went through every single scan that was inside of Nmap, a SYN scan, a TCP scan, a UDP scan, an FTP scan. All of the scans that are in there is Nmap. Go to nmap.org, although I think their .com works pretty well here. Nmap website, that's where you go. Get Nmap 7.99. I know it looks like, what is this website with this somewhat interesting user interface? It's just been this way forever. And this tool is so valuable. Nmap allows you to do things very, very, very quickly at the command line that in some cases would be impossible to do unless you had a very specific tool you built to do it. And although we think of Nmap as, oh, it just finds open ports. Oh, it does so much more than that. It goes very, very deep into being able to determine what's really out on the network. You can perform a lot of very interesting scans, but I will warn you with Nmap and really most security tools, you can create a downtime with Nmap. You can break things with Nmap. So do not scan networks you do not have permission to scan. Do not connect to and use Nmap on devices you do not have permission to do. And Nmap has its own servers that you could scan on the internet. If you really want to scan something that's out there, you can scan anything on scanme.nmap.org. I believe ScanMe is still out there, right? ScanMe, nmap.org. And I think, okay, and it refuses the connection. So it is still there. And they even recommend on the Nmap website, you can scan this to get a feel for how those different scans will work. That would be another great tool to work with in your lab. Go through different types of scans and then watch the scans and what they were doing in Wireshark. And you will be amazed at what's really going on behind the scenes. It is remarkable just how much traffic and the type of traffic that is sent back and forth. The really interesting scans in Nmap, once you get past the port number, there is an operating system scan that can tell you specific information, sometimes down to the exact version number of an operating system of a device that's across the network without authenticating to the device. How do they do that? because certain requests to a machine will respond in different ways depending on what operating system is under the surface. And sometimes it's just one bit that has changed, but Nmap knows what that bit is. It will tell you, oh, that's this version of Windows. And we know that because that's the only version that had this in the reply that it would send. Same thing for Linux and same thing for other operating systems. Another great set of tasks that you can do in Nmap is a service scan. So those are three different scan types. There's a port scan. You need to learn about those. There's an operating system scan. Interesting. Where you really start seeing interesting things is the service scan. This will tell you information about an application that is running on a machine, a service that is running, commonly associated with an open port, and it will tell you what version and type of service that is, again, without authenticating to the device. So it might tell you, oh, this is a web server, it's running Apache web server, and it's running this version of Apache web server. That's pretty amazing. And it's remarkable how they're able to do that. The details of how they do that are in the Nmap documentation. There's a few Nmap books that are now available on the internet. My book is no longer published, but you can find plenty of great information on Nmap. So there's three great things you could do in a lab this weekend. Run and load up Wireshark, get it running. Load up a firewall, play around with that. Load up Nmap, start scanning things that are on your local network. See if you can break your printer. Not break it, but cause it to fail, cause it to disconnect from the internet, cause it to disconnect from the network. You can definitely mess up some devices. You'll need to reboot a number of devices after scanning with some of these more aggressive Nmap scans. And sometimes it might be interesting to see exactly what really is happening behind the scenes. Now, if you're already familiar, they even talk about some of these, like we already talked about the Matrix. They used Nmap in the Matrix to scan a device, find an open port that was vulnerable, run an attack against that port that then got them access into that computer and ultimately moved along the plot. That's how it worked. But they used real tools in a real way, which, of course, for those of you that are technologists, you watch a movie and they do crazy things with technology and you're yelling at the screen, doesn't work that way. No, that doesn't. You're not even plugged in. There's all those problems. You have to suppress that when you're with other normals that are out there watching the same movie. But you at least understand that there are times when a movie goes way outside the scope of reality. And there are other times, like the one with using Nmap during the Matrix movie, where they stick right on. There were some very good examples of Nmap and other security tools used in, what was that, USA Network? Was it USA that had that Mr. Robot? Well, whoever the publisher was, Mr. Robot had some really accurate type of security tool usage in that one as well. So there you've got a couple of things you can do. I haven't watched The Matrix in a while. Maybe it's time to watch that again. Those are things that can give you other ideas of where you might go to have something that might be a good task or a good tool to use that can really move along the process of getting you knowledge, foundational networking knowledge, security knowledge, and you're simply building a number of different tools and reports that you'll be able to use, not just to help yourself understand the technology better, but show other people, perhaps in an interview, here's some reports I did from my firewall. Here's some results I got from Nmap. Here's a Nmap graphical front end that shows me a report of what we did. Those are great things to bring to an interview to show people what you know about these technologies and some of the surprising things that you found when you started installing these technologies. Anytime you do anything with a home lab, it's always going to be good. It's always something fun. It's always something that breaks and you have to fix it, and you become smarter just by going through that process. Well, I think that brings us to the end. As I hear the thunders getting louder and louder, I think that also brings us to the end of another study group. And indeed, we did do a little bit of overtime here, went a little past the top of the hour, but I think that's okay with all of you. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you, chat room, for being here in that first hour. And thank you for your questions that you submitted in the second hour. We always have a good time with the things that we're doing. And don't forget that we have our Security Plus study group on Wednesday of next week. If you're interested in security or you're working towards earning your Security Plus certification, we got plenty of great Security Plus questions, all new questions for you in that study group. And I know they're all new because I haven't written them yet. That's what I'm doing this weekend. So something to sit down and make sure that you have the latest set of Security Plus questions that will help you earn and get through the Security Plus exam objectives. That certainly is something to look forward to. We hope you can come back and join us there. Don't forget about all of the tools that we have on our website at professormesser.com. We'll be over in Discord when we're done here. If you want to meet with other people studying for their Network Plus, head over to professormesser.com/Discord. Thanks for joining us. We will see you next time on the Network Plus Study Group. Thanks, everybody.